competing in different views on this. But I know, as always, members will express their points forcefully but respectfully. So with that, members, we'll open up the session if we are content. So can I welcome members to today's meeting for the Committee for the Economy, and start by taking apologies. So I'll take apologies from Padraig de Largue. Kate Nicholl is joining us slightly late, and Emma Sheeran and Sinead should hopefully join us shortly. Are there any declarations of interest members wish to make at this stage? No. Chairperson's business. Members, I just want to outline that as agreed by the committee, I met informally with the Chief Executive of East Belfast Enterprise yesterday in respect of the Go Succeed programme, and the clerk has kindly provided us note of that and been circulated to members. Are members content to note?
Yes.
Thank you. Draft minutes, members, are at page 7 of the pack and reflective of our discussions on the 22nd of October. Are members content to approve those?
Chair, can I raise one point,
Yes.
please, just an accuracy? At point in the correspondence, point 10 or 9, I think it was, the debate on the Minister and Invest NI.
Yes.
I just wonder, could it be included that I made the request or the question whether it fell within the Minister's power competency at that point?
Yes, I'll amend.
That could be included.
Is that agreed?
Thank you.
Members agreed? Okay. Item 5 then is agreed, and then item 6 is Lord Murphy. Colleagues, I'm delighted to welcome Lord Murphy to the committee today and invite him forward. Can I firstly, on behalf of the committee, thank Lord Murphy for making the effort to come to Northern Ireland to outline his report here to members. Lord Murphy will need no introduction, but his dedication of public service to the people of Northern Ireland during some of the most difficult times is to be hugely commended. And on behalf of the committee, Lord Murphy, can I thank you for your service to the people of Northern Ireland over many years. Can I hand over to you, Lord Murphy, if you're content, if you wish to make any opening remarks, sir?
So, thank you very much indeed for asking me along. It's been a rather traumatic morning. Taxi didn't turn up. And I was inclined, but then looked at it again to walk here, and I thought, I'm not going to do that. So it's very good to be with you, and thank you very much, Chair, for your very kind remarks. I was contemplating, obviously, when I came over last night, that the first time I came here in any sort of political capacity was in 1994, which is a few years ago. When Tony Blair asked me to become the deputy to Mo Mowlam as Shadow Secretary of State. And then some years later I became Minister of State, as you know, and during the time of the Good Friday Agreement, and returned then in 2002 until 2005. So my heart's in the place. The transformation, as you know, all of you much better than me, has been absolutely remarkable. And it's great that, we're actually meeting in these buildings now, because, as you know better than me, the institutions have been suspended for various reasons, and that was a great cause of sadness for all of us, particularly me, because I chaired Strand 1 of the agreement, which set the Assembly and the Executive in being. And now that at last devolution is back, that is great news. Perhaps I can just outline why I was doing this job. Which came out of the blue, by the way, and the Northern Ireland Secretary asked me to do this review into the Windsor Framework, and I realised it wasn't going to be an easy task. Never is it? And I thought about it for a short time, but I thought, yes, I would find this very interesting. We'd been talking about it in Parliament for some years, of course, or some months rather. And as you know, because of the vote that was taken before Christmas, which did not command cross-community support for the continuance of the arrangement, it automatically triggered this independent review. One of the things I think, two aspects I think that I ought to mention to you as a sort of an introduction in this, is one, I think it was too short, by far. Particularly, of course, because the start of the 6-month period was before Christmas. Mm-hmm. So we had the Christmas recess, then all the sort of business of setting it up, getting people to work with me and so on. That took another month. And so effectively, we were down to about 4 to 5 months trying to look at what is the most complicated issue regarding the in many ways, the most complicated issues regarding the economy of Northern Ireland. And secondly, of course, the terms of reference, which were very restricted. It was quite clear what I had to do, but it was also clear to me that it wouldn't resolve the constitutional political controversy that surrounds the framework. The task was to find something which would get cross-community support. Now, inevitably, of course, that meant that I was heavily restricted on that, because with such fundamental disagreements on the nature of it, that I couldn't really, although I've talked about in the report, I was not in a position to make any recommendations on the big picture, if you see what I mean. But I understood and clearly said in the report that there are fundamental differences within Northern Ireland, generally between unionism and nationalism and alliance, but not quite as simple as that always. And I've acknowledged that in the report itself. I also say that in other times, like when the Good Friday Agreement or the St Andrews Agreement and other agreements were signed, these agreements were formed from political parties in Northern Ireland themselves deciding what it should be. And I make the point there that imposition of anything in Northern Ireland is unsatisfactory. The best thing to do is to ensure that everybody, however difficult it might be, gets together and tries to work out a position. And I pondered whether, in fact, had the institutions been up and running when all this was decided, when the protocol effectively broke down and when this had to come in its place, would it have made a difference? I think it would have been very hard, but I think it would have been better, because like with all the agreements, Good Friday and St Andrews, because they had decided there and upwards rather than that away, they were more successful. But it wasn't to be. And so we had to work with what we had to work with. And there's no doubt that the people I talked to, and I talked to literally hundreds of people in that period of 4 to 5 months. There's a list in my report of the organisations and individuals I talked to, not to mention at least 500 written submissions. In all those cases, sincere views were held, whatever your political position were, but there were some, or quite a few, common issues. Even those people who didn't like the Windsor Framework, or those who wanted to live with it, there was a lot of commonality there. And I tried to make my recommendations, and I had to anyway, that was the terms of reference, based on what people agreed. Mm-hmm. And the 16 recommendations I've made essentially are based on agreement and consensus. I have mentioned where there wasn't. On the big picture issue about whether we should have it or not, the constitutional issue surrounding it, talked about it, but obviously I couldn't get consensus on that. But there were other more practical things I couldn't get consensus on either. For example, excuse me, I'm a bit croaky this morning. Relationships with the European Parliament, yes. Whether there should be observer status at the Parliament. I couldn't get agreement on that, for instance. Whether there should be a European Union office in Belfast, there wasn't consensus on that. But there were other things strictly outside the Windsor Framework, such as the ETA, Electronic Transfer Authorisation, which there was agreement on, but wasn't actually part of my terms of reference. But I thought feelings were so high on that I decided to put that in the text and ask the government to look at it. So it boiled down at the end of the day, I think, to two main themes where I could get some sort of agreement on. The one was on the democratic deficit, so far as it applies particularly to this place, and secondly, with regard to how this framework is affecting businesses large and medium and small. And that's essentially what the recommendations surround. On the democratic deficit, there's no question there's an issue there. And if you think about it, the decision to leave the European Union, whatever your views, for or against, meant that people didn't actually think enough about Northern Ireland. Certainly in Britain they didn't. And what had to be put in place were we to leave the EU hadn't been thought about enough. And so we ended up with a protocol, and that didn't work. And then this came along as well as an improvement. And generally speaking, most people I spoke to saw it as an improvement on the protocol for all sorts of reasons. But it's still something you wouldn't make up unless you had to. It's almost a, how can I put it, a plaster on it to make things work here in a highly complicated situation. So on the issue of democratic deficit, how we can influence it, it struck me that the committee, Democratic Scrutiny Committee, and I went to a session and talked to them, were under severe pressure. No question about it. And I can tell you this, if I was parliamentarian, the last committee I'd want to sit on is the Democratic Scrutiny Committee, because it is so difficult and overwhelming.
Make sure that's noted.
I mean, masses of...
There's no nodding as well on that.
Masses of material, coming to it. Too little time to scrutinise it. Insufficient, inadequate resources attached to the advice given to it. Not sufficient good relationship between Northern Ireland, between Belfast and Whitehall. So I've made recommendations about timing, about resources, about personnel attached to it, to ensure that they get a better opportunity to do it more effectively. And the second part of that, of course, was about the business of when is the best time to influence European Union legislation that affects Northern Ireland. Well, the sooner the better, basically. And you do that when it's been written, and that's in Brussels. And so part of my recommendations is that the Northern Ireland office in Brussels should be strengthened with more people and more expertise. It's pretty good as it operates, to be fair. They do a lot of networking and a lot of influence to try and get Northern Ireland's voice being heard. And so that's a substantial recommendation that I've made. Incidentally, the House of Lords committee on the same issue, to whom I appeared 2 weeks ago. In fact, I appeared before the House of Commons one at 9:30, and the House of Lords one at 10:30, and before yourselves now a couple of weeks later. But the House of Lords report, unless you've already done so, is really worth reading. It really is. And a lot of the recommendations that I have made and they have made overlap and are the same. In fact, they've gone into a bit more detail on some of them. So then there's the Stormont break and the applicability. And essentially big political issues. My main recommendation there is that there should be constant dialogue between the government and the political parties to ensure that that's trusted. It's the best word I could use, because at the moment, as you know, Queen's University Belfast last week came out with a survey on what people think about the Windsor Framework, what they thought about me actually as well. It was quite interesting. And that is about what do people think. And as you know, that when the break wasn't applied some months ago, wasn't allowed to be applied by the Secretary of State, certainly in the unionist community, there was a drop in support. And so there's obviously an issue of trust in all that. And so I think the more that the political parties and the executive are involved in those issues, the better. The other more general issue, just before you ask me questions on this, is obviously on how it affects business. It depends a bit on the size of the business. Bigger businesses, very large businesses on a Northern Ireland scale, tended to be more happy with their situation. They also were able to use the dual access more effectively, because a lot of these were international companies as well, and were able to deal with it effectively. But with medium and small businesses, which form the backbone of Northern Ireland, it's a different picture altogether. And the big thing that struck me was the burdens of bureaucracy that were on particularly smaller businesses. Couldn't cope with them, really. And that's interesting to British businesses, by which I mean
Yes.
businesses based in Great Britain, wanting to trade with Northern Ireland. In the end, they found it, and are finding it, very burdensome, and to a large extent, don't bother, because they can't cope with it anymore. So I've made some recommendations regarding that, a number of recommendations. I suspect the biggest one that is a one-stop shop, because people didn't know where to go to. I had people from small business. I can remember one business in Antrim, Ballymena, and she was set up a new business. She'd been a teacher, set up a new business, and was in tears with me about the fact that she couldn't find out the answers to questions on all these things. Now, a lot of money's been spent by government, either here or in Whitehall, on all the different schemes that exist. But it seems to me they're not actually working as well as they could do. And so I do hope that the government, when it's considering its response to me and to the committee's report, looks very seriously at that one, is that there really has to be a streamlining of advice so that people can go to a single point for advice on where they go. It's also helped considerably, of course, by the SPS agreement that the United Kingdom government has signed with the European Union. I couldn't get a meeting with the European Union, by the way. I did ask, but they said this was a matter for the United Kingdom, so I carried on with the United Kingdom. And the issue there is that by 2027, hopefully, that agreement is in force. That should make a very practical difference in terms of goods coming in, particularly agriculture and SPS goods coming into United Kingdom. Same applies to GB as with Northern Ireland then. So that's a definite plus coming along the line. And finally, just perhaps one word about the constitutional issue, which I wasn't really in a position to report on, but I'll just give you a couple of thoughts of my own on that, is that when you look at the term consent, my interpretation of the consent was the consent necessary for where the people of Northern Ireland want to go constitutionally. It stays in the United Kingdom so long as it wants to stay in the United Kingdom. It doesn't if it doesn't. And that's an absolute commitment by any government, I think. I think sometimes that's mixed up with the principle of parity of esteem, which is often forgotten, but was an essential part of the Good Friday Agreement, so that equal weight is given to everybody in terms of their views and their constitutional position. And I'm not totally convinced that has been the case over the last number of years. And whatever happens, whatever changes to the constitutional status regarding, say, the Windsor Framework, has to be done in the context of people getting together and sorting it out. I repeat what I said earlier. The only way that things can change in Northern Ireland, and we all know that, is by agreement between everyone. And that applies as much to the Windsor Framework as it does to anything else. And that survey, which came out last week, still points to the fact that most people in Northern Ireland seem to think that this is a barrier in terms of people's view of the constitutional future of Northern Ireland. So in some way or other, it needs to be resolved by yourselves, not by me, or indeed by government. But an acknowledgement of it is so important. Having said that, I hope that the 16 recommendations I made will be accepted by government and by the executive to make it easier for people to live with this framework, which is a complicated business and does affect people in a very, very direct way as businesses. So that's a sort of long-winded introduction. Sorry about that.
No, thank you very much indeed, Lord Murphy. And I know I speak on behalf of the committee in thanking you and your team for all the vital work that you've done. I'm not going to use this as an opportunity to refight the Brexit wars, because I don't think that does you or the cause that we're hopefully all united on in trying to resolve these issues any service. But I just want to pick up on a number of points that you made, sir. So imposition never works. You said that both in your opening remarks and also within your report, and I think that's something that we should all be cognizant of, and that we need to get a solution that can command the support of all sections of the community here in Northern Ireland. And brings me on to the terms of reference, and I know Lord Murphy did not write the terms of reference, but I'm just keen to understand, did you have any discussions with the Secretary of State in advance of the publication of those terms of reference? Because from my perspective, I believe that you were sent out to bat with a broken bat, and that the terms of reference limited anything in which you could do, and that gave vetoes which you should have been allowed to go out and carry out your work and make recommendations based upon your expertise and the evidence that you received, and not upon a terms of reference which clearly limited the ability to what you could and couldn't do.
The answer is no.
Okay.
Obviously, Hillary asked me to do it before it all came up, before I did it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? He asked me to do this after the vote had been taken place here in the Assembly, but I was not in any way involved in the terms of reference.
Okay.
I knew what they were, of course.
Yes.
And to be honest, in some ways, I knew that whatever one was to do on this, you had to strive for consensus and agreement, but that the central constitutional issue was too big. And although they said in the terms of reference, they referred to the constitutional issue, they immediately said about cross-community agreement. Mm-hmm. Well, you haven't got to be a genius to work out that you ain't going to sort that out in 4 months.
Yes.
And so, I knew that was going to be the case. I also knew it was going to be a burden for me in some ways, try to disentangle what I was going to propose, and did propose, and what was necessary to solve the much bigger issue of the Windsor Framework. And I had meetings with every political party, as well as all the businesses and so on. And in every case, when I met the political parties, I made it clear that, I can't touch that. I would if I could, but I knew from my own instinct that I wasn't going to get agreement in a couple of months on that. That's going to take a much longer time to deal with because it's such a big issue. But at the same time, and this is the reason why I decided to take the task on, was that there were so many things that needed to be addressed regarding the operation and the working of the framework, as I discovered very much so, that it was worth doing it. And that whilst the argument will continue about whether the Windsor Framework is a constitutional burden because of the board in the Irish Sea, at the same time, I think, whilst that's going on, there's a lot of work to be done to try and improve it from the lives of ordinary people, if you like, in Northern Ireland who are affected by this. And also because I think the hugely complex arrangements set up dealing with the democratic deficit, however well-meaning they are, doesn't seem to be working as well as they should. And I hope that the recommendations will improve that. And there may indeed be further ways of looking how to improve that as well. So the answer is no, I wasn't involved in the terms of reference. I knew what they were, accepted that it was going to be difficult, but thought, let's carry on and see whether we can improve the burdensome nature of the framework itself.
And I know you weren't able to touch the constitutional issue, and as a constitutional unionist, clearly I object in the strongest terms to the division of our country with the border in the Irish Sea. But from an economic perspective, did you give any thought to making a recommendation that the Secretary of State or the government should legislate to fully restore Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market, not from a political perspective, of which obviously I would be supportive, but also from an economic perspective, given the clear evidence that was submitted to you about the economic damage that was being caused as a result of the border in the Irish Sea? Not
in terms of legislation. I didn't. In fact, I can't think it was really raised with me in that context. The issue generally was, but, and of course I was conscious all the time that, well, it was if you like, a parallel process. Mm-hmm. There was the process of talking to the parties about the Constitution, which I did, of course I did. But, I mean, as I said, from my own experience, I knew I wasn't going to resolve that straight away, but acknowledged it as an issue. And as I said earlier to you, I actually think there may have been a case, had the institutions been up and running when all this was started, that a more Northern Ireland-centred agreement could have been made. And I repeat, I think all the agreements on the protocol particularly, but also a bit on this, but mainly on the protocol, being done above the heads of the people who, representatives of the people of Northern Ireland, was a grave error. Because such an important issue, and I'm not trying to say for 1 second that's an easy one, because it certainly isn't. But then none of the other stuff we've negotiated over the last 30 years has been easy either, is it really, when you think about it? And if we can do what we've done, why can't we address this as well? So this is an attempt to do it, but I think there's a lot of work still to be done on trying to ensure that this issue is addressed. That's come through last week with Queen's University's survey on people's attitudes. That is still a major issue that needs to be addressed. But at the same time, we really mustn't forget the practicalities of it. And if the democratic deficit issue is relatively broken, that has to be amended. And certainly, how important the constitutional issue might be, we can't forget the actual burdens on individuals and their businesses, because that's for the prosperity of Northern Ireland. We will never forget that. I still think there's an awful lot of work to be done in terms of how you deal with the constitutional issue. Not for me to suggest how that is done, but it needs to be addressed. It's a very delicate issue, it's a very sensitive issue, and something that goes to the heart of politics here. But it can only be done by agreement.
Final 2 points from me before opening from colleagues. So, of the many people that you met in person and the 500 written responses that you received, how many of those said the Windsor Framework's the best thing since sliced bread, doesn't need any changes?
I don't think I had many which said the Windsor Framework was the best since sliced bread. I'm not sure anybody said that, to be honest, but I think people did say that it was better than the protocol, and that something had to be done. There were differing views as to whether the dual access was meaningful. Generally speaking, Nationalist Alliance and others would tend to say that it is. Generally speaking, Unionism said it's been a bit overplayed. As a Welshman and Welsh politician, in some ways I'd rather like dual access to Wales. I'm not quite sure if I'd want all the hassle that went with the Windsor Framework for Wales, but the idea of being able to trade with EU in a special favoured way isn't a bad thing. In terms of...
It is, though, with all due respect, if you can't trade freely within your own country.
No, I come to the internal market side. That's a different kettle of fish altogether. And I don't know, the Independent Monitoring Panel is coming out today. I've got a feeling. Yeah. I of course, met them as well as UK Intertrade UK with Arlene Foster, and I think they were Independent Monitoring Panel were telling me that 80% plus they thought was the figure they were looking at which would be unaffected by this. I don't know what figure they'll come up with later today. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But yes, of course, that's a hugely important issue. And I said earlier, the impact on British businesses has been underrated.
Yes.
And I talked to Arlene Foster and her colleagues on that, and I see a role for her body in trying to ensure that the equivalent of a one-stop shop is available in Britain for companies who regularly trade with Northern Ireland. There's a lot of work to be done on that. On the written responses, on individual responses, I would say generally the majority would have been anti-Windsor Framework. On the, if you like, on businesses and groups and organisations, depends a bit what they were. Political parties normally, I don't need to tell you what political parties think about it, you know it yourselves. Generally speaking, I would say there was an agreement that it was better and that there was work to be done to improve it. Overwhelming agreement on that. If you're in a business, I mean, politics isn't your trade, and they've got to, you know, and they often made that point to me. They didn't want to get involved in the political side of it because their job was to run their business. But what they did want to get involved in heavily was to try and make it easier for business. And so I listened very carefully to those.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Sinead.
Okay, thank you very much, Lord Murphy, for your evidence and for your report. And I very much welcome it. I think the Windsor Framework isn't perfect, and no one said it was, but it was a necessary framework in order to protect the all-island economy and to prevent a hard border in the island. And we need to do everything that we can to prevent barriers east and west, and that's why the recommendations regarding that is really, really important. And I welcome you talking about it as well, dual market access, and how bigger businesses are perhaps benefiting from that in a way that smaller businesses can't. Do you believe that maybe the UK government should give extra resources to, for example, the Department for Economy in order to maximise the support given to be given to smaller businesses in order for them to maximise those opportunities that now prevail?
Yes, I think there is a case for that. Though anybody arguing for extra money 2 weeks before the budget, it might be in some difficulty. But I agree that help should be given. I certainly agree with the principle that the UK government can help departments here in Northern Ireland financially and with expertise. I think that's very important because, however, inevitably, because it's a much smaller organisation in Northern Ireland, which doesn't have a great number of resources, and particularly human resources and the core and expertise, struck me as being particularly important. I suppose it doesn't come as a surprise that bigger manufacturing industries, who very often are international companies, would find it the dual access of more use to them, because a lot of small, medium companies wouldn't necessarily be exporting a great deal. Mm-hmm. Some do, but a lot of them don't. You know, so the more we can help businesses, the better. The issue is whether that help can be easily found. And at the moment, it can't easily be found. For example, the language a lot of this stuff is in, it's not plain English. Mm-hmm. It's gobbledygook. Yeah. And that has to be simplified. It really does. Mm-hmm. And also, what's the name of the scheme that I made recommendations on? Bidder support scheme?
Yes,
this one would be, just give me a second. Oh, you know the one I mean, duty reimbursement scheme, particularly important
the duty reimbursement stuff,
if the tariff situation gets more complicated. Universally, that was felt to be slow,
yes.
And although the money perhaps would eventually come, it would cause serious cash flow problems, particularly with smaller businesses. Yeah. So that has to be looked at very carefully as well. I mean, the question of there was good intent in all these different schemes, but it's getting effective everyday access to them that matters, and the more that happens, the better. The SBS thing by 2027 should make a huge difference. Yeah. You know, to a lot of this as well, and I just hope that sooner that comes, the better. That's always slow too, and so it's important, I think, the recommendation I made, that pressures can always put on the British government and the European Union to be as quick as they possibly can on that deal, so that it comes as, you know, in timely, and that people can benefit from it as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I agree entirely. This place wasn't sitting when the imposition of these frameworks were put in place, and it's never good, and it very rarely works effectively when people are not united and parties are not united. But I think that there is a unity of purpose of supporting businesses east-west in terms of, I'm really concerned that a lot of GB businesses, for example, are choosing not to trade in Northern Ireland because of the added bureaucracy. So anything that we can collectively do to mitigate those barriers is really, really important, because we want to see flows of trade going both ways. And in relation to that, our party had been very much wanting to see an EU office set up in Belfast, because we thought that would be helpful as well. The more institutions that we have here that are helping, and you talked about the one-stop shop for smaller businesses to go to as well. I know you didn't really make any recommendations on that because there was no consensus in the responses. But what are your thoughts in opening up those communication lines closer to here and closer to businesses?
I think the big issue on first of all, on the democratic deficit side is that it's like anything, any laws you make. If you want to influence a law in any parliament, you influence it before it goes to the parliamentary procedure, before the amendments come through and all the rest. You issue it at early stages. And it strikes me that's the most effective way of Northern Ireland saying, look, this ain't good for us. The dental issue is a good example. It wasn't, it just didn't fit. And the fact that was identified at an early stage meant it never happened. Now, it seems to me that could be a much more effective way of looking at whether a law should be effective here in Northern Ireland, and that means when they are made in Brussels. And I think that the European NI office in Brussels does a very good job. Aidan Connolly's an excellent head of it, and he, and like all these things, he knows his way around, but he needs more people, I think, to help him out on the technical detail, which is, these laws which the EU make, as I said earlier, hugely technical, complicated like that. So, is that there are people there who are able to help out and spot at an early stage. There's a red light there somewhere saying, be careful on this one. And I think that's so important to do that. And so if you mention how you influence Brussels, I think to me, within the context of what can be agreed, that's the issue, what can be agreed, then that is the way to do it. Yes, there were ideas put to me. I couldn't recommend them because they didn't command consensus. But I mentioned them, and they were issues from the unionist side, which didn't necessarily command consensus on the way in which we deal with, for example, the democratic deficit, which I also mentioned. And I think it's worth looking at them, but you can only do it if you've got general agreement. The one that some of the businesses refer to was an EU office in Belfast, but that was seen to be politically unacceptable from the unionist point of view. And so that was difficult. But the general point you make is that a lot of these issues, had they been decided in an early stage by people here, there'd be hell of rows and all sorts of things happening, but it would be done here in this building probably, and that was the answer. But it wasn't to be. As can't remake history. That's what happened, and so the more that we can find, the more that this place is involved in it as well through your committees and so on. That's important. It should be discussed openly, and even though there is substantial disagreements in principle, there's nothing wrong in talking about them. I've often said that the agreement I was involved in, I wasn't involved in the St Andrews, but obviously I wasn't in the Good Friday Agreement, and I've often said that I could have written that agreement in 2 or 3 weeks, more or less, myself, and nobody would have agreed with it. Nobody. And the reason they agreed in the end, because they wrote it, and it was they owned it. The political parties in Northern Ireland owned it after lots and lots and lots and lots of discussions and it was so difficult, took years. But nevertheless, it came from the people who represent the people of Northern Ireland. That's what's important. I was a Welsh MP. Why should I be taking decisions on what people's lives are in Northern Ireland? You can help people to make decisions, but you shouldn't be making them yourself. And so with this, I think, as I said, it should have been much longer. 6 months was far too short. At least a year, I think, would have been helpful to get more depth on the issue. And also, I think there could have been some indication, perhaps, at an early stage about how the big issue itself might be resolved, not giving you answers to the resolution, but rather what mechanisms could be made to try and overcome it. Mm-hmm. Any suggestions? I suspect the Secretary of State would welcome them.
Do you think that the Labour government's policy of bringing closer relationships with the UK and the EU will help maybe overcome some of these barriers, and what can we do to influence that type of decision making within the Labour government? Because essentially that's what has to happen in order for us to overcome some of these barriers, particularly the trade barriers, and eventually it'll lead us into a more democratic accountability as well if we have a closer relationship.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? You see, you've got to accept that Brexit is done. Mm-hmm. What's done is done. But there's nothing wrong in trying to improve our relations, to improve our trade, and to improve the prosperity of our country. What's wrong with that? Mm. My constituency successor in my seat of Torfaen in South Wales is now held by my friend Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's the minister responsible for EU-UK relations. Indeed, I was talking to him only 2 days ago about all this. Mm-hmm. You have to tread carefully how you deal with it, but if it's practical issues which will help people out, help lives, like the SBS agreement, mm-hmm.
then
the quicker that happens, frankly, the better. It didn't help that they wouldn't talk to me, by the way. Mm-hmm. And I never quite understood why. Perhaps there was a breakdown in communication, but it didn't seem to me. And it was a short time frame. But their view was relayed to me that this was a matter for the United Kingdom. Well, it is, of course it is. But they're a big player in all this. And so perhaps for a future time, I'm sure that negotiations between government and the EU are always ongoing, including what happens to the Windsor Framework. There's a great big team in Whitehall which deals with it. But we tread carefully because it's a tricky political issue and rely entirely on the practical reasons why we can improve trade within the confines of the agreement that was made between the government and Parliament and the government some years ago.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord.
Thank you very much indeed, Sinead. Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lord Murphy. There's much I could say about the Windsor Framework and about subsequent agreements from the withdrawal agreement right through. Yeah. Much I have said. I believe it was an affront to me as a unionist, particularly with the Irish Sea border. I have talked on the record in the House. I remember the debate which preceded your report. I'll not go over all the points. I spoke for an hour on that debate, but I was able to outline.
How long did you speak for?
An hour and 7 minutes.
That's a long one.
There was issues that I
have my lunch now.
Put across in relation to how I felt constitutionally, how I felt that there was a breach of the consent principle. I know you may have a different interpretation of that, but particularly the concept of cross-community voting on an issue so serious. Serious concerns that here we were, albeit I spoke for an hour, but the debate lasted 5-6 hours, but yet in that debate between Articles 5 and 10 of the protocol, we were essentially signing over 300 areas of law to the European Union in one single vote that day in the Assembly. So for me, it was serious in substance. I talked about over 33 different issues relating to businesses and traders in Northern Ireland where they had been impacted by bureaucracy and customs, on the Irish Sea and how that was making many of their businesses unviable. So just on the one issue, and you talked about the Windsor Framework, and as someone that has the odious task of being a member of that committee from its inception, we know the troubles that it causes, the lack of information, the flow of information, and how we are placed on the envious position to make decisions in short time on something that is largely, in many cases, way beyond our own expertise, and indeed some of the issues that we're facing is for the first time. So I just want to say, I'll ask one political question and then I want to come to the economy because I know that's the context for this committee. But what would you say to the unionist community who feel that the review exercise itself was only ever designed to result in one outcome, that being the retention of the Windsor Framework architecture, in which you have already seen through those that you've engaged with in my community, is totally unacceptable to them?
Yes. The issue then would be, let's first of all talk about the vote before Christmas. And I thought it was puzzling over the years that where always there was been serious work towards ensuring that there is consensus on everything. And that's why I made an issue of parity of esteem, that whatever the technicalities involved in this, the spirit which underpinned all our agreements over the years has been one in which you can get consensus. And I can quite understand the feelings of unionists when they felt that that wasn't the case. Of course, the opposite could be said, that people on the other side of the argument would argue, that's giving vetoes to one side or the other. Well, that's always the case, that you exchange vetoes. The argument was always to do away with the need for them so that you actually get an agreement on it. And so that did puzzle me. But what was, nothing I could do about it. That was what decided some time ago. I only hope that in the months and years ahead, there are serious attempts by government to be able to overcome the divisions on this one, how you deal. Not easy, but how you deal with it. Now, the second point about the practicalities really wasn't referred to. Again, restrained by the terms of reference a bit, but remember that I was totally aware, obviously, of the huge chasm there is amongst opinion here in Northern Ireland. Again, emphasised by that report from last week. If anything, it's got even more of a chasm than it was before. So that the democratic deficit side of it, frankly, doesn't command sufficient trust and needs to be worked on. That was the basis of, first of all, my recommendations on the committee, which I think was seriously overwhelmed. And as a consequence, couldn't do its job properly. And you'll notice in my report, brother, I actually quote a letter from the chair of the committee to me and others. I thought the letter was so good that I put it in the actual body of the report itself. The problems they had in this case on the reserve matter, it doesn't matter. It shows you the practical problems that the committee faced in doing proper scrutiny. Mm-hmm. But my report went beyond the scrutiny, to be honest, although that is the job of the Democratic, this includes in the name, Democratic Scrutiny Committee. There's also a serious case for trying to influence legislation before it gets here. And that's where I keep on coming back to the importance of trying to influence these things in Brussels. Now, the Lords Committee report goes into more detail on the EU, UK bodies and fora which exist in Brussels and London on all that. That has to be seriously looked at, and I think their recommendations are very good. It's not transparent enough. There's not sufficient role for stakeholders to get involved at an early stage. And, I mean, generally speaking, no one would have made this up unless the protocol had been, as it was, so unpopular and ineffective. They had to find something to put in its place. But that seems to me that there's a strong case for continuing not consultation, but talks between political parties on where we're going on all this. And it's not an easy one. I absolutely understand it's not easy. That's a fundamental thing. My point in the beginning of my report on consent, the technical issue of consent, as opposed to the spirit there, is still that I don't think that has been bettered. That is up to the people of Northern Ireland to decide what they want to do with their future. And whether this agreement or any other agreement, framework or agreement affects it, it's you who decide the future of Northern Ireland. No one else.
I believe the people of Northern Ireland, and indeed the people of the UK, particularly Northern Ireland, were badly let down by a UK government in the way in which they negotiated the essential Brexit agreement.
It was terrible.
I think it was terrible. I think it fell so far short. It was for a nation that had prided itself in statecraft over centuries. I believe there was fundamental failings, fundamental misunderstandings, fundamental mistruths. I mean, we had the Prime Minister of the day, Boris Johnson, come to Northern Ireland basically telling a business to their face to just rip them up. Rip your customs papers up, tell them I said so. It was beyond ridiculous. Now, the only caveat I will give to that is the fact being that they can be held accountable. They can be held accountable, they can be scrutinised. But I have a serious issue of mistrust with the European Union. In fact, it's, from what you have alluded to, the fact that they wouldn't even engage with you in the spirit of trying to look towards some of the frictions tells me that my mistrust is not misplaced. And 300 areas of law now sit with the European Union in which there is no democratic oversight. So I can't really get beyond that point, how we solve this issue, because for me, in terms of the Brexit negotiations, I'm not talking about the position different parties took in the Brexit campaign. They're entitled to that, and that debate has been fought. But I'm talking about the negotiations. The cardinal sin is essentially that whilst EU law continues to apply in Northern Ireland, we will always have frictions with our internal market in the United Kingdom. And the principle of dual market access, why I take such exception to it, and why I believe that the vote that happened pre-Christmas, and I said this at the time, it was an illusion of democracy, because I do not believe for one moment if the EU had have thought or been able to analyse that the vote would have been any different than what it was, that it would have happened in the first place. But dual market access gives off the impression to people that it's equal market access. And for many of the small and medium-sized businesses who continue to have their supply chains destroyed, their markets decimated, there is no succour in dual market access for those businesses which make up the vast majority of Northern Ireland business.
Yeah, I think that my views on the dual access came from what people told me. And as I'll repeat, that the larger businesses, particularly manufacturing, did say there were advantages to that which they would very gladly exploit. And that there is a case for trying to ensure that more and more people who can have access use it. It would be foolish not to. However, as you rightly say, the majority of the business we deal with here tend to be medium and smaller businesses, to which that is less significant than the internal market between ourselves and yourselves and GB. So I entirely accept that. But I'd come back to the point repeatedly that I do agree with you. I think that the way all this was negotiated was very poor. And in a sense, Northern Ireland was seen as an afterthought in all this. I didn't, obviously, but I had no influence in any of this. And there should have been hugely more attention given to it at the time of our leaving. I had plenty of time to do it. But again, it was in the absence, not just of the institutions being up and running, but in the absence of real consultations, negotiations, discussions with political parties in Northern Ireland, even if the institutions weren't up and running. I think that was a major error. I am not saying it was a panacea, by the way, because the differences are so big. However, it wasn't even tried. And that was a major error. And I think there may have been a difference. In the meantime, we've got to try and resolve it, one way or the other. And if this system is not seen to be working properly, and I don't think it is working properly, then we've got to try and find ways of improving the operation. As to the wider aspect, which you very rightly described there, it's above my pay grade in a sense, but it is for people above my pay grade to actually engage with. But not, one thing I will give a little caveat to that, not at the expense of this place doing its job in all the other ways that it does its job. Because I think the people in Northern Ireland do deserve their executive and their assembly. I spent a lot of my life trying to ensure that it was up and running. When I first came here, incidentally, unionism generally, certainly the Ulster Unionist Party at that stage, was opposed to devolution. And the fact that Wales and Scotland got it was a lever by which Belfast eventually got its assembly, amongst other reasons. And I genuinely believe that the best thing for Northern Ireland is for Northern Ireland to be governed as far as it can be by the people of Northern Ireland through this place here. And so I'm really delighted that the Assembly is up and running again and the Executive is up and running. Huge issues, my gosh, don't we know? But that's what elected politicians have to do. Yeah.
I agree with that sentiment, but it runs in the face that just in Christmas, which preceded your report, in a 6-hour debate, over 300 areas of law were surrendered back to the European Union, in which members would have no say in shaping the legislation which governs this place in fast ways of our economy. I'll finish on this point because I know there's so much to talk about, and I have talked endless about this. The point that I raised in the debate pre-Christmas, and I think something that does the most harm to all of this, is some of the most ridiculous examples whereby there is restrictions and added costs on certain goods that are coming across from GB into Northern Ireland. And I mentioned them in the debate. They can be anything from parcels, Christmas presents, chocolates, garments, textiles. I mean, we even have right now at the moment where the ludicrous situation whereby it is more cost effective and indeed by a considerable margin for somebody from Northern Ireland to travel to GB, to buy a car from a GB dealer and drive it home rather than go to their dealership 5-10 miles down the road to purchase the same vehicle. That's some of the ludicrousness. I say it even in the report at the time, parts for wheelchairs, for example. There was an endless list. And yet, when we try to get progress on these issues, it's stifled, it's slow, there's no engagement, there's no desire from people like the European Union to recognise these issues as problems. Does your recommendations do anything to encourage business in GB to do business with Northern Ireland, to understand the processes better? Because some of them, I accept, don't understand the processes, and the one-stop shop may help that. But what about the UK government's action on some of these points that, let's face it, to suggest they would contaminate the EU market is totally ridiculous. And you will never, or the European Union or the UK government, will never convince Joe Public, the consumer, or the small business that their product is in any way at risk of contaminating a market, such as the European Union, and in this instance, quite particularly the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah, it is very overcomplicated, and it is very difficult for people to understand. No question about that. And one of my recommendations, and what I talk to people about, and this is back to Arlene Foster's body, Intertrade UK, has a big role to play, I think, in influencing the British government, is to how we can ensure that British firms who trade with Northern Ireland could do it more easily and don't have to deal with the bureaucracy and the gobbledygook that people in Northern Ireland already have to deal with. And I think the problem sometimes, of course, is it's a smaller market in Northern Ireland, and as you said earlier, the smaller businesses in Britain just give up. And that's not just bad for trade, but it's bad for the opportunities of people in Northern Ireland to buy what they want to. I mean, I came across a lot of crackpot examples, to be honest, when I went through all this. One was particularly revealing and a bit upsetting, really, was how, for example, the Royal Institute for the Blind, their shop had to be closed because of all this stuff, all this bureaucracy. And we were, obviously, they're looking into that again, see if it can be improved. But some of it is just daft. And that's why I think that the concentration, from my point of view, is now on the practical stuff. And it all results, doesn't it? Because we left the EU, whatever our views on it, this has landed us in a huge problem in Northern Ireland. And remember, as an aside, that in 97-8, all that agreement was founded on the basis that we were both members of the European Union, both countries now, Ireland and the United Kingdom. And so it was easier to deal with these things. Border didn't matter so much when you were part of the same club. When we left, inevitably it had consequences. And as a result of that, you've been landed with these difficult issues. My only plea is that life should be made easier for people in Northern Ireland, and for that matter in Britain who trade with Northern Ireland, particularly if they're small and medium-sized business, and life should be easier for politicians and parliamentarians who try to have an oversight of the political gap that has been left by all this. The wider issue of whether all this should be in place at all, and whether you should have some other system, and there was recommendations put forward by some people within the UNIS community how it could be done. Continue to make the recommendations as long as we can ensure that we get people
move on, Jonathan. Just
agreement
conscious
behind
the
it.
colleagues need to speak here.
Thank you, Lord Murphy, and
Yeah, no
I'll
trouble.
engage you.
David.
Okay, just to follow on that, and thank you for your report. Thank you for the positivity, actually, and the opportunities that are there to be able to kind of work through. Nobody wanted, or we certainly didn't want, the barriers that exist, and where we are. A couple of things you've said just triggered, and I'm scribbling notes as I do there. But John just talked about the 300 areas of law. That's the same. Are we has this been framed in the wrong way, maybe from the UK government, or Norway, Switzerland, Turkey, international agreements with anybody that trades with anybody takes on the standards to manufacture to work? Should we be reframing this around, rather than a constitutional thing, but around the opportunities of what we actually have to maximise our economy, the economy committee here, but maximise our growth and opportunities?
I think there are wider issues which government's going to have to discuss in the years ahead. Talk earlier about where do we go with Europe. If you remember, one of the suggestions, which was that the whole of the United Kingdom become the single market. Now, whether that's right or wrong, the reality of that would have been that none of this would have been necessary, because everywhere would have been in a single market. And remember that the issues which Northern Ireland faces is also faced, I know, through businesses in the south of England, with France. For example, agriculture industry in southern England is affected because of their relations in France, similarly to what you are here in Northern Ireland. And so that SBS agreement would help them too. But should there be a wider, more long-term look at it? Should we do a Norway? Should we do a Switzerland? Again, entirely out of my remit. But it may be that in the years to come, there'll be some genius who can work out how we can overcome this. Because clearly, whatever things we can do to improve the working of it, and that's the essence of what I want to do, it still is unsatisfactory. And we've got to try and do something to make a better stab at it. Perhaps that will come. I hope it will come at some stage. But short of having another referendum, which I don't think is likely, for some time, we've got to find ways in which we can overcome it. Not necessarily satisfactory ways, but ways which we think will make life easier for people here. But yes, ultimately, I guess people who, I'll be dead and gone by then, I suspect, who are going to look at these things, will try and make sure that we get a better system we've got at the moment. But we are where we are.
Absolutely agree. I'm fascinated by your kind of framing of consent, sort of around the Constitution, if you like, and then parity of steam, which is kind of how we get on with it and live together and work. When the Good Friday Agreement, and you talked about how much Northern Ireland changed to the positive and the change that we've seen from 98 and that time, but should parity of steam evolve to recognise that this isn't just the Good Friday Agreement talks about the two kind of communities, but there's a third part of this now with ourselves and that centre ground. How do we practically bring that into governance, that this doesn't always become, have you any recommendations, on the consent rather than the party of steam, that we can all work together to actually get moving forward?
Well, that is a big issue. Yeah. And there's no question that things have changed over the last 27 years. Of course they have. And that's certainly in the fortunes of your party, in that there's a generation grown up who would decide that we're neither one or the other. And obviously you've got to take that into account in anything you do politically or constitutionally. But what you have to do is then, all this time, three sides, if you like, coming together to decide what should happen. But ultimately, there has to be consensus. You can't carry on like this. There has to be some sort of agreement of where we're going. But that does take into account, and where I do think parity of steam broke down was in the way in which the protocol and so on, and then eventually the votes, were agreed on. I don't think there was a consent issue, but I do think there was a parity of esteem one, and that's the spirit of consent there, and I'm not sure that was taken into account. It would have been had the Assembly and Executive been up and running, because there'd been people there pushing it all the time. I don't want to make a point about the last government, or not my government, but I think they could have tried harder, basically. I think they could have tried harder to try and get an agreement which held better than the one which eventually did. Well, in the end, they denounced their own agreement. That was the irony of all this. I spent a lot of time in the House of Lords telling the government that, well, it was your agreement, not mine, not my party's. And then within a year or so, they denounced it because they realised that it wasn't going to work. And so you had to come up with something which worked. And ultimately, as we've saying just now, you're going to have to come up with something which is going to work. But you've got to decide that. We're the governments. That's the point. You've got to decide it. And unless governments get that message, it'll never work.
Just finally, for me, just on the solution sort of stuff you talk about.
And on the general sense of consent, as a principle, with how you do things in the in the Assembly and in the Executive, that is a matter for agreement. When I've been approached very often, but when I was speaking from the front bench, and people were asking me, well, how is this going to be resolved? Because people have different views, obviously, on how consent works in this place. People here to decide it, not governments.
Just on that, but consent is about the Constitution. So is what, and parity of steam is just how we agree to move forward.
It's a big principle.
Yeah.
It's a big principle, because there would have been no agreement without it. That's an essential part of it. But it's a difficult concept to explain to people. We know what it means. It means you've got to work together to sort things out, essentially.
I appreciate there's a load of people or the rest want to come in. Just the one-stop shop, we're kind of looking at solutions, how we can make it better for business companies. I'm a little bit concerned that some of this was based on a lot of the barriers are actually English companies or Scottish Welsh coming across rather than our guys going, and we appreciate that, and we need to work our way through that.
We do.
But when that kind of one-stop shop, the EU, we've as Alliance have asked in the previous for that office in Belfast, and how do we make it easier? But is there anything we can be doing now? That the one-stop shop you're recommending, that which it would be absolutely the best way of getting information for small businesses. But is there anything we can be doing? I'm just thinking at the Economy Committee for our minister to be doing now, or the executive to be doing as a wider piece to start. Appreciate that the UK government have got to take your report, got to do, but is there anything we can do, or we should be recommending do happen right now that would help move that?
I think you can start working towards that concept, and trying to influence decision makers in government, whether they be here or in London, that they've got to come to that conclusion. Now, there's brains better than mine can work out how that works, but in this highly technical age now. It shouldn't be beyond the possibilities that you can use the internet or you can use the telephone and talk to people or go online to people to ask what are sometimes quite basic questions to which people haven't got an answer. And they spend in hundreds of millions of pounds on the schemes at the moment. I'm suggesting they could be better spent. And one way is have somewhere where people can go and they can listen into a language they understand, and they don't have to wait forever for people to reply to them, because there's HMRC involved as well in some of those schemes. And if you're going to get people to engage and therefore have a better economic business life because of it, I think that is absolute first priority, is to go that. And what you can do, I think, is keep pressurising ministers and the executive here to start working towards that. Actually, what form would it take? You know, I couldn't come up with an idea. I'm not that qualified to do that, but I know the concept is important. And I could see what people were telling me. People were telling me, I don't know where to go. Simple as that. Don't know what to do. As if they were in tears talking to me. And so if there was a way to overcome that, that would be absolutely wonderful. And again, underpinning it, if the SBS comes as quickly as possible, that reduces the number of people who want to use it in the first place after that. But to think that all is rosy in the garden is absolute nonsense. It certainly isn't in terms of how people are facing this bureaucracy.
Listen, thank you very much. Thank you, Lord. Appreciate it.
Anna?
Thank you, Lord Murphy, for coming in and giving us your evidence. It is very complex. I just wanted to raise 2 points with you, if I could, please. The General Product Safety Regulations. You'll be aware my colleague Robin Swan MP raised the issue of selling poppies and has had it since reversed. But why did it take so long for the NIO to realise that poppies are not covered by the GPSR? And if they are struggling to understand the regulations, you can see how difficult it is for charities and other small companies to navigate these regulations.
Yes, well, I don't know why they took so long to do it, but there is a case for a lot more cooperation between government departments. You know, very often government works in silos, and if you've got the IRC in between, it gets more complicated. But that shouldn't be the case, and there should be a much quicker response to these issues. I don't know sufficient about the detail, but the principle of having government respond to difficult issues, and if they respond too slowly, is something that has to be addressed. No question about that. Yeah.
Certainly, you've mentioned, the pace of change, and that is something that is very frustrating. This morning, I listened to Tina McKenzie from the FSB, and she spoke to Rachel Reeves yesterday after Rachel Reeves did her presentation, her pre-budget address. And Tina McKenzie said that currently FSB sees 30% of small, medium-sized enterprises in Northern Ireland are indicating that they don't see survival beyond 12 months. So it's really critical that a message is there, that the one-stop shop, that the solutions are there to help those small businesses find their way through this process.
Yes, I mean, it's a double whammy for them, really. I mean, they've got obviously the issues that affect small businesses generally in the United Kingdom, for example, national insurance and other issues. And certainly the FSB, which is a great organisation, by the way, raises with Rachel Reeves. By the way, it's the last job I want to do as Chancellor of the Exchequer. If I'd ever been offered, I'm sorry. Not for me. Anyway, the point was that they generally, but the Northern Ireland small business has on top of that all the issues we've just been discussing. Financial, but also in terms of running the business and the burdens it puts bureaucratically on a business. And so it's whatever's done in the UK regarding small businesses is then made even more difficult because of the situation in Northern Ireland. And I hope Hillary would actually be making that point, I'm sure he would be, to Rachel Reeves, because every time there's a budget or a review of spending, the territorial secretary of state, they're called, I used to do it, I called in with the Chief Secretary to discuss the details. And that's one that I'll make sure he raises.
Thank you very much, Lord Murphy. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Gary.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Lord Murphy, for your time. Very much appreciate you being here in person as well. One of the things I want to follow up from my colleague Johnny, the EU engagement piece. So for many of us, for many people in Northern Ireland, we have felt that certainly from the outset of the decision of the United Kingdom to leave, that the EU, from our perspective, along with the help of, unfortunately, of some of our closest neighbours, have tried to make it as difficult as possible for Northern Ireland and for the wider United Kingdom. That is a feeling that we have, and certainly it is backed up, in my opinion, by evidence. In terms of the ongoing process to resolve the issues, one of the points made in the political declaration of the Windsor Framework was that there would sort of be that engagement through the joint committee. I appreciate that the European Union disappointedly haven't met with you or responded to your work. In terms of the UK side, how do you believe that those relationships are? Because if we're serious, it's not enough simply for politicians to say, well, we need to work our way through that. The reality is businesses in Northern Ireland are suffering as a result of the Windsor Framework, and that's clear from the evidence, as Diana mentioned, from FSB. So how serious do you believe the EU are in terms of helping resolve those issues which clearly continue to exist?
Well, as far as I know, I mean, they would be very foolish if they thought that if life became too difficult here, that they would be unaffected by it. Of course, it's important that they understand that. And I know that the negotiations between Nick Thomas-Symonds and Stepovich in Brussels are ongoing. I also know that personal relationships between certainly those two, but among other ministers, is pretty good. Because, as always, of course, everything the EU done is determined by what 27 member states decide on it all. And that's why it's so cumbersome very often to deal with it. But the recommendations particularly made by the House of Lords Committee with regard to the EU-UK bodies, and I made one, but they've made a number of others as well, that's pretty important too. You know, for example, they'll have meetings, they'll say, don't tell anybody about the result of these meetings. That's bonkers, really, when you think about it. I mean, that there has to be more transparency on it, so that people can actually see that people in the British government, and for that matter in the executive, who are working with them, that their views have been heard and are known to be heard. And so there is a big job of work to be done to convince people that at that level, at governmental level, that framework which has been set up, I can use the term, of the various committees at official level, at ministerial level. I know Northern Ireland can be represented at them, certainly through the First and the Deputy First Minister. But people need to know that's happening, and there's a case, for example, of the minutes to be made open so that people know what's understanding. And there's certainly a case for major stakeholders, FSB we just talked about, for example, to be more closely involved in discussions that are taking place. So transparency is the word of the day on that, and continued improvement on it. I don't think relations are particularly bad for 1 second, but they can always be improved. And again, you've got a difficult line to tread on all this because people's views on the European Union are so different. But that doesn't mean to say that we don't use these institutions properly, and in this case, particularly for the people in Northern Ireland. So I think relations are good, but I think there is a genuine case for improving how those EU-UK bodies work in relation to Northern Ireland, and for more representation from Northern Ireland itself.
Well, thank you for that answer. And in terms of the FSB point, obviously we're seeing day and daily basis of challenges for GB businesses trading with Northern Ireland. We're seeing impacts on our constituents. Those GB businesses in many cases are the supply chains for our businesses here in Northern Ireland, so these are vital lifelines. In terms of their, and you mentioned the work of Intertrade UK, and we need to make sure that that is properly staffed and financed and given the capacity that they need to do the task that they need to do. Right. In terms of then those GB businesses, are there any recommendations that you have in terms of how they could input into our democratic processes here in Northern Ireland? Because it is important that we in Northern Ireland understand not only what they are going through, but we need to fix that problem, because we cannot write off those businesses who have decided no longer to trade within the UK internal market effectively with Northern Ireland. So have you any recommendations in terms of how they could feed into our democratic process?
In the recommendations regarding EU-UK bodies, that's part of it. As you know, the European Union is always very cautious about what they would call regional government as opposed to national government. So that, if you remember the case of the Belgian Wallonian government holding up a whole series of changes in the European Union constitution by regional government doing it. So it is very often the case that the British government, on behalf of Northern Ireland, as it does through the Cabinet Office particularly, but elsewhere as well, there is such close working relationship between officials particularly here in Belfast and in London, and then the relations between London and Brussels, because the London-Brussels relationship is obviously acutely important for people in Northern Ireland. And, you know, officials and ministers must keep on biting their tongues and reminding themselves that they're doing this because of Northern Ireland. And they can't do that unless they get the views of the people here. So I know it's complicated, but they're the sovereign state, they have government, they have to deal with it, but they can't easily deal with it without the views of the executive and the assembly in so doing. And that I've noticed quite significantly. The EU's troubled about that because there could be, 100 regional governments doing the same thing. But it is different. There is nowhere in the European Union where there is this peculiar situation of a geographical island which is divided like this, one bit in the single market, so all in the single market, but one bit in a different country, which is out of the European Union. And that's the dilemma they face. But that dilemma should not be beyond the wit of men and women and to be able to resolve.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Gary?
And finally, but no means least, Kate.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lord Murphy. I'm losing my voice, so everyone will be relieved.
Join the club.
I have the joy, like Johnny, to be on the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee, and never in my life did I think I would have the level of knowledge about fertilisers and labelling as I do now. It's been eye-opening. I agree with what you say about the caution around engaging with regional government, and when we visited Brussels, I think it was last year, what really struck me was we met with policy officers, and I met someone in the airport who was a business representative and was there having meetings with senior politicians. So there definitely is that caution around how they engage with us as well. But I have noticed that very good relationship between the officials. You've already talked a little bit about dual market access. So I won't labour that, just to say that we would like to see more done around that. What I wanted to ask was, in your report, you talk about Article 2 and the non-diminution of rights, outlining that you believe there exists a sentiment that both the UK and EU view matters related to Article 2 as either too complicated or too sensitive, and as a result it was consistently overlooked. That's quite concerning. What do you think needs to happen to improve focus on Article 2 going forward?
Article 2 was not the subject of the cross-community, the vote before Christmas. The majority vote before Christmas. That was Article 510.
Yes.
So it hasn't got quite the resonance in terms of what this review was about, but I didn't think I could ignore it because I talked as well as to businesses, I talked to all the church leaders, I talked to civil society in other respects as well, obviously. When I was doing, you'll see the list at the back of the report. And all my point is that wasn't put in there for nothing. It was put in there for a reason, and that is both the British government, and legislature, and its equivalent here in Belfast should be conscious of it and bear that in mind when they're making legislation. I can't tell what, it's not for me to tell ministers and parliaments what to do. All I can recommend is that take note of it because it's part of the framework. It's still an important aspect of it, and certainly the Human Rights and Equalities Commissioner has made that point very powerfully to me when we met, and so that is the reason for that recommendation. Is that don't forget, it's not just part of the various agreements over the years; it's part of the framework as well, because the framework was the protocol originally and the framework tried their best to ensure that they weren't going to upset arrangements that have been working here for the last quarter of a century. And that's why that was in the first place.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned when I came in that the ETA was something that kept coming up, but it wasn't within the ETA.
ETA, yeah.
But it wasn't in the scope of your report, but you still noted the unpopularity of it. What's your sense of the willingness of the government to acknowledge kind of the harm it's causing to Northern Ireland, and what's your feeling of what may come? Can you speak to that at all?
Well, I can't speak for the government on it, of course I can't, but I just hope that they were aware of the seriousness of it. I understand the rationale behind it, which is to do with security and borders, and that, of course, is not the easiest subject at the moment. However, there is a unique situation in Northern Ireland and in Ireland where things like tourism are overwhelmingly, they work together because people come to Northern Ireland to visit Ireland as a whole. And any restrictions on that, and people in the hospitality industry who I talk to, particularly those, and the tourism industry who I talk to, were very troubled about it. And I understood their feelings, and I would just hope that they could make it much simpler so that if you're a bunch of tourists from the United States and decide it's not worth the bother doing all this and don't come to Northern Ireland, then Northern Ireland's losing out on it, and in both those sectors. And you were talking about earlier, those sectors are already being hit by the bureaucracy of the framework. If they hit again by the ETA, it's another blow that a small business might have. And so it wasn't technically, as I said, a matter for this report, but it came up so often that I thought I had to mention it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your recommendations. I think the message of how we need to address this further upstream, especially as someone who sits on that committee, I fully appreciate. But also, I found it really reassuring just hearing your comments around how it is what it is, and we have to work on practical solutions to make things better for everyone. So I found this really, really reassuring, and really grateful for the work you've done. Thank you.
Very much for you.
Jonathan, we have 3 minutes. I cut you off before you.
Very briefly, so I understand the need for your work to be time bound to ensure that there's legitimacy, but you said it was too short.
Yeah.
If you had have had longer, do you think that you would have had additional recommendations, number one? And number two, do you see a role for yourself going forward in dealing with this issue?
What about me? That's up to the powers that be. But I do see a role in my being very much involved in trying to ensure that the government's recommendations as a consequence of these reports are acted on, and I'll keep a very close eye on it in Parliament, and obviously they'll involve me. I just hope they'll accept the recommendations of this and the committee, the other committee. As to whether anything different will happen, I can't say, can I, because it didn't happen. But I do think that I could have talked to more people, and I could have talked in more depth to more people. I talked a lot. I talked to over 100, and right across Northern Ireland. But I still think it was short, and I do also think that I could have taken into account on a longer period the political side of it, because I had a meeting with every political party. I met politicians as far as I could do in Parliament itself, because they're in the Lords and the Commons representing Northern Ireland, and obviously it was daft for me not to talk to them there, and I spent a lot of time doing it. But it would have been helpful. I think all I could at the end deliver was a snapshot, and I think that had I had another 6 months, I could have gone into it in more depth. And I don't think I'd have resolved the big issue. Of course I wouldn't, because it wasn't part of the terms of reference, but because it is so big. But I think we could have kept working on these practical issues which affect the ordinary lives of people in Northern Ireland, which is so important.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, for your indulgence.
And I will close with my opening remarks. Lord Murphy, thank you for your continued dedication to the Northern Ireland political process, even though you're no longer in office. Yeah. I know that you continue to be very fond of the people here on this place. So can I, on behalf of the committee, thank you for all your work, and I hope that you continue to have the same dedication to trying to get an outcome that can command the support of all communities here in Northern Ireland.
I hope it can. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. And I was delighted I could be able to come across in person to do it, rather than this sort of stuff. And I must say, the other thing that's so welcome and I find particularly so pleasing is to be able to talk to a committee at all, that you're all up and running again and doing your best for the people in Northern Ireland. It's great for this to be operated like this, and all the best to you. Be happy to talk to you again when the government's come out with its recommendations.
Thank you very much.
At least I hope I will.
Thank you. Are members content that we take a recess here for around 10 minutes? Is that okay?
Thank you very much.
Members, are we content to take a photograph with Lord Murphy? Just push the button.
Okay, colleagues, the committee will now commence in public session. Just as a reminder, we're joined online by Emma Sheeran, and Jonathan Buckley has now had to leave. So we'll move to actions agreed from that. So are members content we follow up with the Secretary of State in terms of when he is planning to respond to the recommendations made within the Murphy report? Members content with that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. We'll then move on to item 7, members, which is our evidence session from the Road Haulage Association. Colleagues, can I thank you for coming along here today, and can I apologise for keeping you late? But we'll hand over to you at this stage to make some opening remarks if you're content.
Thank you very much to you all, but particularly to the Chair for receiving our letter in the first place. We watched the evidence session that the FSB gave a few months ago, and so much of that resonated with what we as an organisation have been hearing from our members. The barriers and cost levels of bureaucracy and the hindrances that hauliers are facing on a day-to-day basis when they're just trying to support the Northern Ireland supply chain is quite horrendous. I was very, very keen to bring along 2 members who could get across their lived experience on a day-to-day basis. So rather than listening to myself or Alistair as part of a trade association, for us it was really important that you hear from the businesses that are feeling this directly every day. So I'm delighted to have Alistair Hobson from Montgomery Transport, and he will be telling you his experience from the perspective of a medium-sized business. And we have Mark Tait from Target Transport, who is an SME with 4 or 5 employees. Mark, is that right? Yeah, 4. And they're right at the coalface when it comes to moving goods GB to Northern Ireland, and it's a particularly difficult time. We believe there are some solutions. We believe that part of that sits with the reset talks between the UK and the EU, but those are long-term aspirations, and we feel that more needs to be done. While those would remove a lot of the problems, on a day-to-day basis it's becoming more and more difficult for these guys to carry out business. I don't know who you would like to hear from first in terms of what their experience is, or if you have any general questions before that point.
Maybe if I'll open up then. Could you, gentlemen, thank you both for coming. I think it's really good to hear lived experiences rather than political arguments being rehashed. So could you maybe just give an overview of how complex the new procedures are, the cost that's adding to you? Have you had to change in terms of suppliers? Have you had to employ additional people in terms of the paperwork that is required? Today, the report on the UK Internal Market Guarantee Scheme has been published by the government. And I just think it's important that we nail the misconception that might come out from that. So there's saying that 96% of goods qualify for that scheme. But I think it's important just to record, and you can maybe speak to this, that scheme still requires friction and still requires paperwork, and that's 96% does not mean that it's completely free-flowing trade, that there are still requirements from that. So maybe we could just speak to those if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks everyone for the invite as well. I've been involved in customs for 28 years in different roles, mainly in air freight. What we have in Northern Ireland at the moment is probably the most complex border in the world in terms of how we move freight within the United Kingdom. When the Windsor Framework was implemented in stages. We mapped out 17 different ways that we could move data into customs. In terms of cost, it's difficult for us to give you visibility in terms of cost as to what it costs, because we do work into the Republic of Ireland. But certainly one of our largest movers of data, let's call them, is the largest supplier of consumer pharmaceuticals in Northern Ireland. They supply 55% of the market, roughly. Now, the estimate that they gave me just to implement the Windsor Framework and ICS2 was £250,000 for one business. What we're seeing is a disconnect between politics and the civil service, I guess, and that's our main problem. We bring the problems to the civil service, and the stock answers to the civil service, we basically argue them into a corner, and the two stock answers are, that wasn't part of the agreement, or that's a commercial decision for yourselves. The realistic outcome of the lived experience is that small and medium-sized firms are really hit by this, particularly in Northern Ireland and GB. There's going to be less choice in Northern Ireland because GB firms are walking away from the market that we find in small terms. It's being filled in some ways by the larger businesses who can cope and who have the budgets to cope with the IT development. But certainly we see a lot of smaller firms in particular struggling. And I guess the main outcome to this really is, in our opinion, is that people are flouting the law. They're finding workarounds. And in our opinion, it's actually making the so-called border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland more porous, because it's given people more opportunity to, once the goods are in Northern Ireland, to do what they like with it. There's other issues as well that I'm sure Mark wants to touch on as well. So really, the way customs is set up, we are legally responsible for all of this. The legal burden falls on us. We keep being told that the bad actors in the supply chain will be pursued. We haven't seen any evidence of this from customs north or south, and we're in a space where we're still competing with some firms who have 10 licenses for 15 lorries. 10 operators licenses, 15 lorries, 10 registrations, 15 lorries. So it isn't a big step to say that these guys are moving things and declaring them as empty. The trailers aren't being and can't be inspected, and therefore the goods are slipping in to the market in the EU anyway. So this is a solution that was ill-conceived and practically doesn't work, and it's costing a lot of money. And the result that we're actually seeing at the moment is that talent is leaving the industry as well, in a time when recruitment is so challenging. And we're actually seeing that the top talent who have experience in customs are seeping out of customs as well, which is an added pressure to us. So all in all, it's an administrative burden. A lot of our operations are carried out at night. If you have a problem, one of the examples is that we are told to call the company and sort out the problem. How many companies work at 3 o'clock in the morning when our operations occurring? None. So the solution that Customs and Excise gave us was leave off the freight that doesn't qualify, that hasn't actually made the cut to get across the border. But whenever your margins on a 40 pallet truck are 2 pallets, we just become uncompetitive. We're going out of business. That's the bottom line. And 450 haulage firms closed, I believe, last year in the United Kingdom. That's a real pressure. And whenever we have a government that says we're going to build 1 million homes, we're going to build this infrastructure product, that, they're not going to do anything, because transport is almost an essential service. And the pressure on us is unbelievable. We just want politicians to overcome that gap between the civil service and what is the lived experience.
When you say civil service, do you mean UK civil service or Northern Ireland?
UK civil service, mainly.
And is that including your sort of interactions with the trader support scheme?
We're sort of dealing at a higher level with the Northern Ireland stakeholder engagement team.
Yeah.
And a lot of their things it's coming from them.
Okay.
Continuity and staff's a real issue there. When you go to a meeting and say they're standing up and saying these derogations for the Windsor Framework are fantastic, and we're saying to them, but ICS2's due in, where the information that you provide isn't required anyway. What's your plan for ICS2? And the leader of that group says, what's ICS2? That's a major problem. and I think industry in total is having that from civil service, where the civil service can send 3 emails about an announcement about some sort of change in a transit code. 3 separate emails to me, but yet can't answer simple questions on how do we simplify trade.
Mm-hmm. Through the chair, in my written submission, I mentioned the TSS specifically around. I mean, we listened to Lord Murphy's evidence there, and I've read his report, and it's very difficult to disagree with his views on the TSS. Alistair mentioned ICS2, which brings another level of bureaucracy and more hassle and cost for the sector. But HMRC were originally due to bring in ICS2, or the changeover to ICS2 on the 1st of September this year. And they wrote out to industry to say that along with most of Europe, there would be a delay to a maximum of the 31st of December this year. And out of nowhere, on the 18th of August, on a completely random date, TSS switched over to ICS2. With no warning to the industry, no time for the industry to adjust, no time to find the extra information that's required for ICS2. Mark, you wandered into your office on Monday morning to be confronted with that, with no clue. So why they took that decision, why TSS took the decision to flip over at a completely random date, which didn't even match the HMRC date, rollout date, and inflict that on the industry. But that's just one of a number of ways in which we feel the TSS, which is supposed to be there to support, it does little to help the industry, if anything. Mark, you could probably come in here.
Yeah, so thank you very much indeed, folks, for inviting us along. I just wanted to maybe touch on what you said at the start about 96% of goods qualify for the UK market. I'd actually refute that. I think the Secretary of State says, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there are now 15,000 businesses registered for UKIMS between GB and NI. Well, the first question I would have is how many aren't? Mm-hmm. And it's a bit like a gym membership, because you can register for something doesn't mean you get to use it. What we have found with the Windsor Framework and UKIMS, it has been grossly oversold as to how it's going to simplify things, I think, as Ali has pointed out earlier. How do I explain it? If, for example, if we do work for a customer in Mollusk, we bring in lifting equipment, it's like slings, ropes, that sort of thing. So they are UKIMS registered. So, for example, if I bring in 2 pallets and there's 100 boxes of slings in those pallets, you're saying, well, you're UKIMS registered, those goods should qualify, no problem, that should save you any hassle. The problem is they sell goods into the Republic of Ireland and further into the EU. So if 2 boxes, or even if 1 box in those 2 pallets goes into the Republic of Ireland, everything in those 2 pallets is at risk. So nothing qualifies for UKIMS. And then the problem the customer has is, if they've duty to pay on it, they'll have to pay it up front. They have to try and reclaim it, but they can only reclaim it when they've sold the goods and when they can then prove that either they stayed in Northern Ireland or they left Northern Ireland. I give you another example of that, where I have a customer in Lisburn who we do work for the water service here in Northern Ireland, where when they're completing supplementary declarations, I sat down with them and through it with them not that long ago. And I raised it with HMRC at one of the meetings we had in Belfast, down in Erskine House, where they're maybe processing 4 or 5 supplementary declarations at a time, having to pay the duty, which can be up to £100,000 at a time for a small business, and wait 120 days for HMRC to give it back, so they can then process another 4 or 5 declarations to give them money back again to try and get it back again from them. So it's a vicious circle of. You say about cost, I'm like, okay, you may say that the cost is neutral there, but if somebody's selling out £100,000 all the time, waiting to get it back, that should never have been paid in the first place, how can any small business survive that? And like, as I say, we're a company of 4 people. Yeah. I sat with a customer last night for 2 hours trying to clear 7 supplementary declarations after work. I was able to clear 3, help them clear 3, 4 I've had to refer back to TSS because even I don't understand the codes and the information they're asking for. So how is any small business supposed to understand in lay terms what we're expected to provide in terms of information? And again, as Ali says, from our point of view, we're so scared of inputting incorrect information onto the system that we're not prepared to take the risk. Because what UKIMS should allow us to do for the customer is put the information in up front, whatever they're asking for, and then the customer should have nothing to do whenever it gets here. And that's only if the goods qualify for UCIMS. But again, the problem we have is, how do I know what the customer's going to do with the goods?
Yep.
How do I know where they're selling them to? So therefore we have to say to the customer, look, we can't use the UCIMS system for you, as it's now set up in TSS. And then, as Ali has alluded to, the ICS2 system is kicked in, has just basically wiped out any benefit that UCIMS supposedly provides, because it's now asking us as hauliers, for the safety and security part of that declaration, to input commodity codes, countries of origin values up front, which we're not getting from suppliers in GB. And the other problem, as I raised with HMRC, was when you're dealing with groups, you're not dealing necessarily with one product on one pallet or one product on one trailer. So if I get, as I said, go back to the slings, so if I get a pallet and the slings, there's ropes, there's nuts, there's bolts. So if there's 40 or 50 different products on it with 40 or 50 different commodity codes, I'm expected to input that for one pallet. Now that could take me half an hour to 45 minutes to do that for one pallet. And I've maybe 60 or 70 things to do a day as a small business. That doesn't compute into my working days. It doesn't.
I think it's important to say that as well, that the government has set out their stall quite early to say that they don't really care about small businesses and medium businesses in this. Particularly, the civil servants at the top of revenue and customs. But the solution that the large integrators are providing isn't working either, because they're taking systems that they apply at a multinational level and trying to apply it internally to Northern Ireland. And what we're seeing is, certainly we would talk to members in other bodies as well, and what we're seeing is that they're just adding staff. There's one large manufacturer who we probably can't name at the moment, but and she has said that she's got 3 members of staff, and all she's doing is managing the after effects of the Windsor Framework and the trade in Northern Ireland. And it's a cost to their business of £80,000, a year for 3 staff that they can't afford, and that pressure on manufacturing just tends people to want to close manufacturing in Northern Ireland if they're not supplying into the EU. And that's a stark reality of the practicalities of what we've got. We have put forward solutions to customs and revenue, but they just won't entertain it. They won't. It's as if they don't want to put their head above the parapet, almost.
So your solutions look like?
Our solution would be to transfer the point of risk to the point of sale.
Yeah. I put that in my written submission to you.
Yeah.
We feel that that would remove, it wouldn't remove everything, it's not a silver bullet, but it would make a lot of the pain and a lot of the delay in cost go away, particularly for the smaller businesses. Mark mentioned some of the financial pain. Just for context, apart from anything else, the average margin for a haulier is about 2%. Alistair mentioned that on a 44-tonne truck, 2 of the pallets will represent the profit. For a lot of businesses, then it's not necessarily the goods that are going from Northern Ireland to GB that would represent the profit. It would be the return load, and those return loads are diminishing over time. The haulier bears the risk for these movements, but bears an unreasonable amount of risk within the supply chain as a whole. The fuel represents about 40% of a haulier's cost. The credit lines for fuel are 7 days maximum normally. And so when you're looking at payment processes of 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, then the haulier could be paying out fuel for 5 or 6 jobs ago before they see the pay.
Yeah.
So there isn't the family jewels sitting in the background that they can use when situations go awry, or when their truck's held because of whatever the process that they maybe missed. They might not have the right commodity code, or and so as Alistair said, it's the willing horse that's being flogged here. The ones that are trying to do it right, the ones who have engaged with HMRC, the ones who have asked the questions and as a result are on the radar, they're the ones that are getting stopped and pulled. And as time moves on, there will be less goods on Northern Ireland shelves, there will be less choice for consumers, and there will most definitely be less hauliers that are prepared to move the goods in the first place.
Sorry, Chair, just to give you another example of what you're alluding to there, Martin. I have a customer there when Martin referred to the ICS2 that came upon us by surprise in August that wasn't supposed to come in until January. So within 3 weeks, I had one customer in Portadown who 3 suppliers in GB have now stopped supplying. They won't comply with the ICS2 requirement. So that's not just a loss for him, it's a loss for me.
Of course.
So it is. And I know the argument is, we'll go get it somewhere else, but it's not always easy to go get it somewhere else. The cost of bringing it from, whether it's from down south or whether it's from further into the EU or whatever, there are cost implications to that too, there are environmental implications to that as well. So yes, it's not just as easy as saying, right, okay, well, you've lost one supplier, it doesn't really matter, we'll go look for something else. I can't just flick a switch and flick my business model to make that suit, unfortunately.
Okay, I'm going to open up the colleagues. Diana?
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much for coming in. It is really, really complex, and I can hear the difficulties you're having. It's very, very challenging. I had one question which arose from a haulier which came to me, and they were talking about disparities in tachograph regulations and the enforcement between GB and Northern Ireland in the context of cross-border haulage. Are these caused by operational compliance issues? Are they exacerbated by the Windsor Framework? Are you hearing anything about that?
The Windsor Framework doesn't specifically deal with tachograph regulations. It just deals with the movement of goods. So it could be to do with the other legislation, that's retained legislation, but that's not my area of expertise in the business.
And it's in the sense of the waiting and delays when there's a waiting time needed at a port if something isn't prepared, the paperwork isn't right.
Yeah, what I would say is that depending on where you are within a 2-week cycle, a driver needs to take their weekly rest at certain times, whether it's 25 hours, 24 hours or 45 hours, depending on the cycle. So if they're held up at a port or delayed there when their weekly rest runs out, then they must take their breaks. So
in essence, what would, if say for example, if Dira said that a vehicle was held for 2 hours, the reality of not going to a haulier because of rest periods of the tachograph could be a day. And what we see is we would have to switch trailers and things like that, switch your operation. But what that has an impact on is the vehicles going back into GB, because I think it's important that in order to have really true dual market access, that we need to be able to service that. And if we have trailers held up at the port coming into Northern Ireland, it doesn't take, a school kid could tell you that it's going to be a problem going back out. That's essentially what the issue is. And again, I just can't reiterate how much this pain is being felt in the haulage industry. It's just shocking, and it's shocking what the civil service are asking us to do.
It's important we hear that, and thank you. And also the just in time, the supply chain, it stymies manufacturing production because, we've talked about cash flow as well, that businesses are ordering just in time products, and that has the likelihood of holding up production as well if there are those delays.
we saw that at the end of last year when Holyhead Port closed, and we had a situation where drivers who would have been using Holyhead to get to either the south or the north to take their weekly rest were stuck in the UK. So that meant they had an additional day's driving to get to Cairnryan or to go south. And that meant that the driver, the truck and the trailer were not in the right place that they needed to be. That was in the run up to Christmas, which exacerbated it, but it's essentially the same issue. If they're held past their rest period, then the driver, the truck and the trailer are not where they need to be for the next day.
It takes a storm that lasts more than 12 hours to really impact shelves in Northern Ireland, and I think that's the fragility of the supply chain, and I don't think people realise how fragile it is. And we're not looking for sympathy. We're looking for action.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair.
Nate?
Thank you very much, and I would concur with what Diana has said. It's really important that we hear firsthand just the difficulties, and I was struck by the 2% profit, and that really, to me, seems very unsustainable as a business model, and the pressure that you must be under is quite significant. And Alistair, I think you referred to 450 haulage companies have closed down in the UK. But specifically, have you got numbers around that haulage companies that are from here that have closed down? And are you saying to us here at the committee that there are a lot of haulage companies that now see that their business model as it exists with the complexities and bureaucracy are now unviable and have the potential to close down?
Well, I couldn't comment on the industry as a whole. You know, I'm just here on behalf of my business. But certainly, the evidence that we have is that people are flouting the law to get round this. That's basically what it points to. You know, we asked for a trusted trader scheme for hauliers. So hauliers that weren't in the trusted haulier scheme felt more as the collar of the inspections and things like that, for want of a better expression. And we were just told no. You know, we'll take that away and think about it. And a year later, we have said to them, well, have you any more thoughts on having a trusted haulier scheme? It won't work because it wasn't part of the negotiation. And again, when you have customs and revenue officials saying, well, that's a commercial, that's a commercial decision. The commercial decision for a lot of these businesses is going to be either flout the law or see if they can get loads into, you know, the likes of France and things like that. But certainly there, you need to be having the work there at the correct margins, because if you're sending a driver to France, it takes a hell of a lot more time than it does if you're sending the driver into Manchester or somewhere like that. I don't know whether or not the RHA could supply that information, you know, at a later date.
We could certainly have a look at that, but we will have a breakdown of the numbers of where a lot of the insolvencies have come from. What we have noticed in Northern Ireland is there's been a lot more consolidation. So a lot of businesses that have ran for quite some time, a lot of family businesses, are now open to selling up and getting out, basically, because it's become too problematic. We've seen it quite a bit. So, yeah, the market's changing because of this, no doubts.
You're obviously very well aware that one of the recommendations from the Lord Murphy inquiry is a trusted haulier scheme. And even listening to you today, I'm busy trying to look up, you know, what does the ICS2 scheme, what does it do? You know, it is really complex, and for individuals, even though we're sitting here in the committee as representatives, it's really difficult for us to understand that as well. So, I mean, that recommendation to me sounds extremely sensible, that you would have a specific trusted haulier scheme where experts and those that are working in that industry are feeding in just where these barriers are and the complexity. And, you know, with 4 employees, Mark, as you said, in your company, I mean, that's just beyond burdensome to try and deal with all of those reports and filling in all of the forms in advance of anything being put on a lorry to be actually taken from GB or from here to GB. So, I mean, I have absolute sympathy for the sector. None of this is easy, and any barriers at all are going to be difficult, and for a small business, an awful lot of cost. So, I'm glad you came in today, and I'm glad that your voices have been heard, because I feel and hear your frustrations.
Sorry, could I just point out, answer what you mentioned, as somebody who works as a very small business, just what the chair referred to at the start, to help me take on extra folk to cover the cost. We can't afford to take on extra folk to cover the cost. So it just means I have to work longer.
Could you mention that, you know, you were dealing with something last night?
Last night, and so, not for any pay, because, you know, that's I don't get paid for that. I know there are guys who will. I know there's a company, I'm not going to mention names because he's not here, but there's guys who we've dealt with that will go in and obviously do the work for the company, but they will charge a hefty fee for them to do so. They will. But even he admits, he says, you as a haulier don't have that luxury, you can't turn around and do that.
Well, as politicians, we have to try and find some solutions for you, and hopefully maybe you know, if these recommendations do go forward, and we're going to be pressing the UK government to see when they will, you know, put these recommendations forward. But obviously resources are required in order to look into some of these issues too, and we'll be seeking.
And again, sorry, just to come back on that, because in relation to what we've suggested, as Ali and Martin have said, there were guys blatantly flouting the law at the minute, getting away with it. You know, hauliers here, hauliers in Republic, companies in Northern Ireland. And to me, that's wrong. The suggestions we have made is that if you reintroduce some of the schemes that we used, which were very simple things to use when we were members of the EU, it could be audited so much easier from point of sale. And then anybody that breaks the law, you can see right away from that information that company's obviously not doing that right, and then you can go and find it. But the problem you have at the minute is if nobody's checking anything as it comes off the boat, if it's been declared as an empty trailer, shall we say, nobody's checking it, it goes through, nobody says a word. But then on the flip side of that is if you then have to start checking 100% of trailers coming off boats, nothing would ever get delivered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think what a trusted haulier scheme would do is, if you had the haulier who had their systems audited, that had their procedures audited, and they'd been checked and verified, then it would allow the authorities to go after those that hadn't been checked, etc. And there's precedent in various different other industries. Construction's got a trusted trader scheme and various things. But as far as what we would hope that the politicians here and in your relative parties could do, it would be to try and influence and push the idea of risk being moved to the point of sale into the debate, the reset talks, because our frustration is that despite ourselves and many others bringing this forward, we've had no indication that it's even remotely approached to being on the table for these discussions, and it would make such a difference to Northern Ireland PLC. Mm-hmm. It really would. For anybody that's not 100% sure about what we mean, is that although there are some goods like retail that can move faster through the process, the default position is any goods that move to Northern Ireland are at risk. Now that's puts under pressure anybody who's wanting to stockpile or put things in a warehouse to carry. We've got a member who they have offices in GB and Northern Ireland, and the Northern Ireland operation helps with the build of a product that then goes back to GB. Yeah. But their position is untenable because all the goods, the nuts and bolts and bits that are coming from GB to Northern Ireland to be assembled are red-laned basically. So our suggestion, along with many other bodies, is that if you move the risk to the point of sale, then you will know what the end destination is. You will have the invoices to show where it's going. And if it's going to Republic of Ireland or if it's going to the EU, then it attracts customs. And there's no argument with that. If it stays in Northern Ireland or it goes back to GB, then it doesn't. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. But at the minute, everything that's coming into, or just about everything that's coming into Northern Ireland, whether it's going to stay in Northern Ireland, whether it's going back to GB, or it's going elsewhere, it's all basically lumped into the same thing and attracts the same hassle, the same cost, and in some cases wrong duty as well, which is another thing that we've been seeing recently. Whereas even goods that are moved under UKIMS, the large parcel delivery guys are chasing for duty, even though there's no duty required on it, which is more hassle for the admin, more time spent arguing with them, and it's just real difficult to do business just now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Gary?
Thanks,
David.
No, David, go ahead, because I have a small. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you coming in, and actually, it's really good for us to hear the kind of front hand of what is happening. Obviously, don't want any barriers there, but we've got to work our way through to make better. So, a couple of things just to kind of, I get the frustration. I hear the frustration. You can hear it in all of your voices. A couple of things to square the circle, because we're getting other information then. So if you've got the like of, is it a different size of parcel is the issue, trying to define where the issue is. So for example, are opening their base in Belfast because they've got access to it. So is it because it's bigger parcels, or is it the smaller? Is there an issue in the?
I'll give you just a lived example of this. We do 2-person deliveries for some of the large retailers in GB. The way things work, basically, a lot of these people use the same fulfillment centre, no matter who you're buying it off. So we have a contract with fulfillment centre. We would take a line of fridge freezers that are 95 kilos in weight. They move in under the consumer agreements. If you buy the American fridge freezer when it's put in the pallet, and it's just slightly bigger, it's 110 kilos, that's subject to full customs procedures.
Even for a consumer?
Even for a consumer. So somebody's just stuck their finger in the air and went, 100 kilos is the limit we'll put here. Yeah. No one knows where, nobody can tell us where. But generally speaking, if you have the likes of a large retailer in GB delivering white goods, or even the sphere we're in, and which is why we find it so problematic, is because we're in pallet work, and certainly the Road Haulage Association represents the people who work in the sphere over 100 kilos, we're having to do full declarations for Mrs. Smith in Finicky Road to get our American fridge freezer. It's just madness, but yet Mrs. McConaughey next door gets a smaller fridge freezer, and it comes in without all the palaver. Yeah. It's who dreams these schemes up without consulting people?
Okay. So you've answered that for so the other bit is the way you're talking is there isn't so much an issue with the lorry going out of here, but it's whenever the return is coming, that's the issue. Yeah. So whenever we get trade figures through, so those trade figures show I can't remember which way around it is off the top of my head, but it's like 14% growth in the last year from Northern Ireland to GB sales exports, but it's 12% growth from GB to Northern Ireland. So if you aren't haulaging that growth and there's not more, is that just been moved in a different way, or is that?
Alistair, you've had a look at this?
Well, I've tried to. Some of the data on this is not entirely up to date, possibly. It's difficult to really see what's going on. There are some indications in the data that's available, particularly around unloaded movements through ports in Northern Ireland, to suggest that it's easy to get goods out the back in, and that's putting a cost onto the hauliers, these guys. But it's a difficult picture, and I think there's something that we would say is that we need to see a bit clearer data, probably from the Northern Ireland perspective on how the Windsor Framework is affecting things, for us to be able to really quantify the impact on our members. You've heard the frustration. It is going to lead to impacts. It's difficult for us to turn around to you and say, this is the clear picture at this stage.
Does that include loads that are bypassing GB? Those figures?
No, from GB. Those were the figures from
those
GB.
Are just GB.
I'm not dismissing anything about the problems. What I'm trying to work out is, I get the paperwork and all that. I get all the problems, and I want to look at how we look at solutions in a second. But what you're telling us is you're carrying less back. But what I don't understand is if the figures are showing there's more coming across, is that just coming across on an airplane, or is it coming in a different route, or is it coming through?
It's probably the large consolidators. There's large consolidators. You have to think about transport as, we're in the sphere of row, which is roll on, roll off, but there are other methods to get freight in. There's low, which is container work. There's air freight, and then there's the large consolidators which sit in a gap that is almost voodoo to us, for want of a better expression, because they all have, the likes of UPS and things like that, have one person in customs responsible for solving their issues. What we're seeing on the ground is that for manufacturers in particular, that's where the 80,000 comes in, where somebody's had to have 3 members of staff, because essentially what that manufacturer business is having to do is operate what's called an inward processing scheme, which is IPR, which is a layer of customs knowledge that's beyond the rudimentary customs knowledge of what even Mark's talking about. And essentially, if you're bringing in this glass, you have to be able to track that glass through the supply chain. That's what it calls for. So I don't know, I can't really answer without seeing the data. I'm not quite sure, but we're seeing bigger suppliers probably slightly increasing their volume, but we're seeing less choice as well, because the small and medium-sized firms are definitely walking away from the market, because if you're selling 2 pallets to Northern Ireland and it costs you an extra, let's say 50 quid for 2 pallets on one consignment, why would you not sell those 2 pallets into Birmingham? And that's what people are telling us.
Yeah.
To our sales, to our BDMs regularly. We don't really want to go down that route anymore. But larger firms then, they might be picking up the slack in that. I'm not quite sure.
Can I just I want to look at solutions, but I'm just it's intriguing of all the levels of barriers and the complexity of this is there's multiple layers to this. But do you see? And you might be able to answer this, but coming into the south of Ireland to come north, is there the same? Is that easier, or is that actually more complicated?
We find that easier.
So actually coming from Wales across into to Dublin and then coming north?
You know what you're doing.
And those barriers aren't there?
The barriers are there, but it's a one-stop shop solution.
Okay.
So in Northern Ireland, the government has actually, the government, whoever they've actually complicated the situation by offering us 17 different ways that we have to deposit data into their servers. Whereas we can do a customs entry into revenue in Dublin with one customs entry. We know where it goes. We have one software package. The guys are trained to do it. They hit a button and it goes to revenue.
And that's your way.
And that's well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the customs entry completed. Yeah. Whereas we're essentially doing almost 17 different types of customs entry to move goods into Northern Ireland. Because depending on if you're in NERMs, if you've got UKIMs, if you're going to a residence, if you're going to a residence over 100 kilos, if you want to do API, if you want to deposit the information in another way. What Mark said was that pharmaceutical company, we are one trailer and we're having to do, and we think it's quite simplified for them, by the way, we're having to do 6 customs entries for one trailer, depending on various Incoterms, how they're selling it, and whether the goods are subject to NERMs or non-NERMs. And that's for one trailer, we're doing 6 customs declarations.
And then could be waiting 120 days to get your money.
Can I get your money back?
Can I just solutions then? The one-stop shop. You're kind of said is that the trusted hauler scheme? Is that what you're kind of, or what is the one shop? What would that look like? And then what can we do?
Sorry, just to ask you one wee question. You asked about the figures. Does that include retail and does that include food?
It include everything. That's
well, you see. Okay, so obviously we can't speak on behalf of anything like that. Obviously, because I know the latest figures come out that Northern Ireland's basically feeding 25% of the UK as a whole. So yes, there's probably a large growth in food export. Obviously, I can't allude to food, and probably Ali can't allude to food. Like from a commercial point of view, we have seen a drop off in manufactured goods leaving Northern Ireland. From our point of view, only from my own experience. You're asking about the solution. Well, again, the main ask we're sort of pushing here is to move that at-risk to point of sale. That again, as Martin alludes to, it's not a silver bullet. But it certainly moves the point of risk to, like with respect to every other international declaration or every other international sale, you declare it at the point of sale, and obviously there's duties to pay on it. You pay it either at the point of sale or point of receipt, whichever way the Incoterms work. And for us, that would be one of the major improvements to the system. Now, it will take a few other things. It's not just to sit and say move everything point of sale and that's it solved. It will take a few other things, no doubt, but I think that would be our main ask at the minute. So it would be.
Yeah, it should take away the situation that Mark was talking on earlier, where somebody can only do a certain amount of declarations and pay the duty in order for the duty to come back, in order for them to afford to be doing the next lot. So the cash flow thing just becomes a ridiculous position to be in.
I think as well as that, the pressure, what Mark's saying there, he mentioned someone that he was speaking to last night was 7. We had a large retailer contacted us in the last 2 days. And when I say a large retailer, I mean this company has sponsored Premier League, Championship League football teams in England. And they've said, can you help us out with 750 supplementary declarations? And that's a backlog. But how does that improve trade, that they have to do 750 declarations? Most of which will be staying in Northern Ireland because they have supplied consumers directly into Northern Ireland. And where does the government sit with this whenever that's technically illegal? Yeah. Because it's gone over the period that the supplementary declarations have to be completed. But there's no thought that this just generates more and more bureaucracy. Whenever technology can solve this, the ideology has to line up with the practicalities. I was just looking for a quote there that I got. it was from 2019, whenever the various people were arguing with each other. It was Sabine Wayland, and she told the BBC when she was asked, can technology solve the Irish border problem? And she said, not in the next few years. That was 6 years ago. People are still hanging on to these things from 6 years ago. We as businesses have seen technology move on exponentially in that time. The solutions are there. We're pleading for people to come and visit us even. We can't even get people to come and visit us. They don't want to be seen. They want to go and see a shining light. And I know what sphere people live in. They need a good story. But we're not asking to put you in the front page of the Irish News or the newsletter. We're just asking to come and see us, see our lived experience, get sort of a handle on what's going on, and we'll solve the problems with you. We want to solve this. We want our businesses to thrive, and they're not thriving.
We want to see your businesses thrive as well, which is finally, just for me then, if this is an agreement between obviously the UK government and the EU, so we're kind of that bit removed from it, but if there's something that we can do, is it what does that look like? Do you want us to highlight that?
Yeah, that's that we want. We have to point out as well, and this is where we've come right from the start. We were kind of a lone voice at the start of the Brexit, the early days of Brexit, when we were pointing out that these issues will be detrimental. We want to point out that this is about freight movements. It's not politics. But we need politics to resolve it. So what we would hope is that, regardless of what side of the house you sit on here or in or in the UK, that Ireland PLC or Northern Ireland PLC needs this, and the businesses within it need it. So we need the discussion about moving the point of risk to the point of sale. We need it on the agenda when they're talking about the reset talks between EU and UK, because as I said, we've not had any comfort so far that that's even on the government's radar, that they're prepared to speak about this. Because I feel personally, and I know I'm not alone, from other bodies, that when you bring up the issues of moving goods GB to Northern Ireland, then that for the UK government is very much filed in a too difficult to deal with box just now. There's never a right time, because in a run-up to election everybody wants to hit the buttons that will get votes, but that's the key point. Nobody seems to be able to grasp the nettle with this and say that this is what's required. So I mean, it's not just going to be hauliers that would benefit from this, it's all GB to Northern Ireland movements. So regardless of what sector you're in, what sphere you're in, everybody benefits.
Listen, thank you very much.
Garrett. Thanks, Chair. And look, a lot of the questions have now been asked, and you've answered them very well, and hopefully you feel that you're getting a hearing and that your issues have been raised. But as you say, Alistair, sympathy is one thing, but action's another, and you've been waiting obviously for some time on that front. I just want to ask a question in terms of, I think first of all, I find it absolutely ridiculous that the situation is that you can get stuff easier from GB to the Republic of Ireland than you can within the own internal market. I think that's absolutely shameful for any UK government to be over that. That being said, as I said to Lord Murphy earlier, I feel that we're working with the European Union, who from the outset never accepted the result and made it as difficult as possible for us to try and smooth our own internal market. In terms of Lord Murphy's recommendations, so there's some good stuff in there, and we're waiting for the UK government to give their verdict, or whether they accept them or not, and the Trusted Haulier scheme is one of those things. Do you see those recommendations? Obviously, the Trusted Haulier scheme is positive, but are there other things there that would make an imminent difference within those recommendations?
I think the version of the Trader Support Service is fit for purpose. Providing, I know there's a lot of hard-working people in there, but essentially what we have been left with is a data entry website. So whether you get the data, whether you type the data in, or whether you spend $250,000 to get that data done via software developers or whatever, that is not fit for purpose. The people behind the TSS, as far as we're aware, have solutions, but we believe that the new tender has been reduced it hasn't been, hasn't been expanded. The requirements for the new tender have been reduced. This is what we have been led to believe. Whereas we know that there is technology available right now that can take information, whether it's in a PDF or whether it's in an API or whatever, and it can store that information centrally, and then it can manage it instead of the hauliers managing that, the government can manage that, and then essentially that would need legislation to do that. And that's the pain point. We're at the fulcrum of the legislation, and we just want to move free it.
See those GB businesses who are unable to get their goods into Northern Ireland, that's having an impact on our businesses, and clearly your business in terms of the transport of it. Are the GB businesses, do they see it, are they not shouting loud enough in terms of the impact that it's having in getting the goods in, or is it a case of they just are so confused, and I'm exhausted even listening to some of the bureaucracy, are they so confused by it that they've just said, you know what, it's not worth the hassle, it's a fairly small proportion of what we do, so we'll just forget about it?
Well, again, unfortunately, for my sins, I'm a member of the Committee on the Associated Pallet Networks, so that's the people who work in partnership with other firms around the UK and Ireland. And what the feedback that we're getting in those meetings are that we're just treating Northern Ireland as another part of the EU in terms of the fallout and the practicalities and the outworkings of this, which is madness whenever, we keep being told by the leadership in the Northern Ireland Stakeholder Committee that we will talk to any business you want to. That's great. There's 3 people in that committee. How many businesses are they going to speak to? And that small time scale, and what they have actually told us in meetings, and Mark can kind of testify to this as well, is that you need to be going out and telling your customers this. But we don't often have a relationship with the people who are buying and selling the goods. We may have a relationship with a third-party logistics provider or a fulfilment centre, and we're being put in the middle where they're saying, sort that problem out, but that's between the buyer and seller of the goods. It's not. We don't have any relationship with them. We're maybe fifth hand. So that I'm not sure whether that answers your question or not.
But it's clearly having an impact on you, and it's one of the issues that I raised with Lord Murphy in terms of how those GB businesses can feed into our democratic processes here in Northern Ireland. But ultimately, it's a UK-EU negotiation, and it does concern me that if you're speaking to civil servants and they more or less says, well, that's not what was agreed, as if like that's it and we're never ever going to be able to, we have to just suck it up and live with it. That concerns me, and if that's the space that the government's in, then we're certainly not going to be silent on that front. But let's wait and see what the recommendations come out of the government. Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Kate. A lot has been covered, but I actually felt quite anxious listening to what you're going through and the idea of having to manage all of that. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and you offered for us to come visit. I'm very happy to come and visit and see what it is you're going through. And I think you've heard we have different views on exiting the EU, but we're all united on our commitment to seeing our businesses thrive, and you're not being allowed to do that right now. Just to say, I have heard what you've said. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and the committee definitely will be relaying this and making sure that your voices are heard. And it's always really great when people come with the solutions as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. Jens, thank you very much. We'll be doing quite a bit of follow-up in relation to both the issues raised in Lord Murphy's report, but also yours today. Not in my role as chair of the Economy Committee, but in my private role. I have a debate in the Assembly on this Monday after next, so hopefully the unanimity that was in this committee will transfer into the House, but somehow I doubt that. Yeah, exactly.
Chair, through from our perspective, if the committee or any of the constituent parts of the committee have any questions at all, then you have our contact details at RHA, so please feel free to reach out to us direct.
Yeah. Can I thank you personally throughout this entire process that you have been willing to stand up and speak up on this issue, particularly at a time when it was taboo that you risked the peace process in Northern Ireland and that you were putting people's lives at risk and all this nonsense, that you stood up and said from a particular business point of view, these arrangements do not work. So thank you for being...
It was always about freight movement,
yeah, exactly.
Nothing else.
Exactly. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So
Would members be interested in finding out who this Northern Ireland stakeholder team is and bringing them in to see if we can get some interaction with them?
Sorry?
So we can see what work they've actually engaged in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Northern Ireland stakeholder.
Yeah.
Team, Northern stakeholder team. Okay, seek a briefing. Chair, do you also want to, further to your letter to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, just be clear that you're supportive of the Trusted Haulier scheme, supportive of the suggested improvements to the duty reimbursement scheme, maybe ask for an explanation on what happened with ICS2, which is the import control system, and maybe ask for commentary about the suggestion around point of sale risk.
Yes.
And maybe also clarity on the new tender for the trader support scheme, whether good use is being made of IT solutions. Happy for that.
Yeah, well, it was just that point of risk and point of sale. Just what are the impacts of that, and has there been an analysis done on any other unintended consequences in and around the point of sale? Because they alluded to, Mark and Alistair both alluded to unlawful transport and logistics kind of happening as a result of the difficulties around the point of risk. Now, obviously, us as a committee, listening to people saying that there's unlawful movements is very, very difficult and so and uncomfortable. But I'm just wondering, what does that entail, and why is that kind of promoted, and is it around the point of risk and the point of sale, and is there anything that we need to understand underneath that, if there's any issues? Sorry.
Okay, so we'll seek clarity from the Secretary of State about, because these are sort of, I think, I'm feeling these are all reserved matters. I don't think they are new replacement acts, so I don't think they're Windsor Framework Committee. So I think it's probably this committee, but they are reserved things, so I don't think the department can answer. And previously when we've asked, they haven't. So I think it's only the Secretary of State that we're relying on.
If we can find out why this 100 kg was selected. Given the heavier, it's more unlikely to move from one person's private address into the EU single market. But I don't know. Okay, we'll move on then, members, to item 8. Come on ahead, sir. Thank you very much indeed. So the committee will now receive evidence from Insolvency Practitioner in respect of the Insolvency Amendment Bill. This session will be recorded by the official report, and I'm delighted to welcome Ian Leonard. Ian, thank you very much, sir. And if you want to make any opening remarks, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, listen, what I'm going to do here is take sort of 5 to 10 minutes just to sort of lay out my thoughts, and then I think field any questions. I'll start first to introduce myself. Like you said, I'm Ian Leonard. I'm a licensed insolvency practitioner since 2014, currently employed by Interpath Advisory, having previously worked for KPMG for 21 years. I'm also the outgoing Northern Ireland chairman of insolvency professional body named R3. R3 would be the UK's leading trade body for the insolvency, restructuring and turnaround profession. But again, I think as it outlined to the clerk, I'm here in a personal capacity today, and give my views on the proposed legislation. So I haven't given a written submission beforehand, and it's fine. So I suppose just by way of couching this, the insolvency profession touches many people in different walks of life. So whether this is a company director whose company is in trouble, an employee about to lose their job, an individual in financial distress facing bankruptcy, a creditor who doesn't get paid for services rendered, a member of the public who's paid for something that they're not going to get. I could go on, but insolvency will have touched an awful lot of members in the public in different ways, and obviously to varying degrees of severity. But simply put, the current legislation in Northern Ireland to deal with this wide and important area is significantly out of date, and is badly in need of modernising and refreshing. So I sent a list of 22 changes that are proposed to be implemented, and I don't disagree with any of those, and in fact I'd actively encourage and welcome the majority of them. They will make the process of administering estates slicker, quicker and more streamlined, and I think the big picture out working on this is the slicker and quicker and more efficient that we can operate, the less money is spent, the more money then becomes available for the bodies of creditors. So I'm not going to go through each of the 22 changes and comment on all of them, but I've read the sort of the previous sessions, and I'm just going to pick up on, really, I think, might give my commentary on some of the points and some of the themes raised in those sessions, if that's an okay way to approach this. So I think the first topic I'll look at is obviously the alignment with England and Wales. And I view it as a positive thing from a procedural point of view and a practical point of view. I mean, if we look back to when insolvency legislation was introduced in the mid-1980s, the pattern was pretty sort of straightforward. England and Wales implemented the legislation. A couple of years later, we more or less sort of copied it and had it in place. So other than a period of about maybe 2 years, our legislation was always more or less identical to England and Wales. Significant amends were made in England and Wales in 2010 and 2015-16. Those changes have not yet been implemented in Northern Ireland, so as such we have a set of regulations and rules which are significantly different to what is currently in operation in England and Wales. So what you've got is a number of insolvency practitioners in Northern Ireland who will take on work both in Northern Ireland and in England and Wales. So we are dealing with 2 separate sets of checklists, 2 separate sets of procedures. I'm sure you know when I've heard all of this before, and from a regulator's point of view, the regulators are again having to adjust their reviews depending on what jurisdiction they are operating in. And I think a point to flag that maybe hasn't been raised yet is, in order to become a licensed insolvency practitioner in Northern Ireland, you have to pass an exam called the JIEB exam. That's been the case since the mid-90s. The JIEB exam, which all Northern Ireland practitioners sit, is based exclusively on England and Wales legislation. It is not based on Northern Irish legislation. So what you've got is, for the last 30 years, a bunch of practitioners in Northern Ireland who have studied, passed exams and got accredited based on England and Wales legislation, who are now operating what is now essentially a different set of rules. So I chaired a panel discussion recently as part of my R3 chairman role, and I put an informal vote, a very informal vote, up in a poll to the audience to say who was in favour of having a unified set of legislation, and 90% were in favour of it. So I think it's a clear appetite, obviously, within both myself and I think the wider profession, that we are brought into line with England and Wales. So the second area that I'll focus on, that has been picked up on the others, is about how these 22 changes significantly reduce a lot of administrative burden. Just to give you some examples, I suppose, to bring to life some of the changes, there was a bit about the removal of the need to obtain sanction. So sanction, for example, is if, and it's only bankruptcies and compulsory liquidations, but if a bankruptcy trustee wanted to take a legal action, for example, to repossess a house, he would need to build up a case and get sanctioned from the official receiver. I've never had that refused before, but it's an administrative step. It's a lot of work, and I think I welcome it because it allows practitioners to simply exercise their own judgment and get on with these things. So I think that is a positive step. Digital communication, which I know has come up before, for me is a huge and a hugely positive change. Just to give you a couple of examples, I looked at a group of 3 administrations that I'm running that have been going since 2018. This is 3 companies in a group. Since 2018, we have spent £40,000 on mailing and posting costs of reports. That's money that could have been obviously saved and put towards payment of creditors. And obviously the carbon footprint impact of that, I didn't attempt to count how many trees were felled in producing those £40,000 worth of reports, but it was a heck of a lot. So I think the ability to issue these digitally is definitely welcomed. Another area where this will help, I think, is payment of dividends to creditors. So again, it's not unusual in a case that a dividend to a creditor won't be paid until many years post-appointment. So if you're maybe an individual member of the public who has a claim, if you're maybe a former employee who has a claim, what we see is a lot of these people move houses, and when you're moving houses, of all the people you think to notify, I suspect the insolvency practitioner of the company that owed you money 10 years ago is one of the last people you think to notify. In that case we issued £200,000 of dividends, I think thereabouts, to former employees, and £20,000 of those cheques were uncashed because they'd moved house. Now, we didn't have to, but we did go to the effort of tracking them down, and they all got cleared. But again, people move houses, people's personal email addresses tend to change. So I think that's a positive, as is the opt-out, the amount of letters and emails we get saying, why am I still getting these blooming reports every 6 months? So the opt-out is a positive thing. I know there was reservations, I think, from maybe the IPA about that, but I certainly no issue of it. And I think, again, it was raised to have the dual option, so where you don't have a digital way of contacting someone, you do send it by post in that instance. So I think that's positive. So the final administrative burden bit is there are a couple of matters which currently require a court application, which will no longer require a court application, such as payment of dividends from a prescribed part and an initial extension of an administration. Again, matters that will just streamline and speed up what we do. So I think overall the reduced administrative burden is hugely welcomed by those working in the profession. So 3 other points that were raised that I'll touch on. One is the deemed consent method of appointment. So in short, in Northern Ireland, to get appointed as a liquidator, you need to convene a creditors meeting, you need to book a room, you need to invite people to attend, either in person or by proxy, etc., etc. And quite often, a lot of effort goes into a meeting that nobody turns up to, and again, a lot of time has been wasted. The deemed consent allows us to effectively write to all creditors and say, listen, the directors want to appoint us as liquidator. If you've no objection to this, it will happen. But it still gives the creditors who want to have a physical meeting the option to seek to convene one. And equally, it gives the practitioner who may want a meeting for various reasons the option to hold one. So I think that flexibility and the optionality that brings is welcomed. 2 more points, which I think were mainly dealt with Mr. Gowdy from the Bar Library, but are important, very important issues in the profession at the minute. One is the assignment of rights of action to third parties and how the legislation aims to permit that. So in my career, I have had a number of instances where there were potential courses of action, either against maybe a bankrupt or a former director, where there were simply no funds available in the estate to pursue them. Now again, Mr. Gowdy made the point, and he's right, the creditors have the ability to fund these actions, but actually they rarely do, because they are already out of the money and don't want to spend more money pursuing an action which may take years to come to fruition. So that actually rarely happens. The consequence of this is that misdemeanours by directors or rogue bankrupts or anyone will often go unpunished, simply because there's no money there to chase them. And I think that is against public interest on many fronts, and is shortchanging creditors as well, because funds that could be recovered potentially are not being recovered. So I guess the message that sends, almost, if you're going to asset strip a company, well, strip them all, so you don't leave anything behind to allow the liquidator to pursue an action. So the ability to assign a right of action to a third party means that if there's an action there that we can't afford to pursue, we can at least sell that to someone who does have the means to pursue it. And I think that's welcome. And I know Mr. Gowdy did raise about a recent court ruling which expressed, I suppose, concerns around this from a just judicial public policy point of view that, again, I won't go into today, but I think the principle and the idea of introducing the ability to sell these actions is a positive one. And as much as anything, it will at least act as a deterrent if people know that the practitioner, whilst he can't pursue the case himself because he's no money, can sell it to someone who can. I think that's a positive development. And again, Mr. Gowdy made the observation that there may well be a limited market for purchasers of these claims in Northern Ireland. I don't disagree with that. And I also fear that the quantum and level and size of the claims in Northern Ireland may not be enough to entice buyers, but there's absolutely no harm in the practitioner having it in their toolkit, even if it is just a threat to bring someone to settle something. Because I have seen that when a case I had in England, I didn't go ahead with the litigation funding, but the mere threat and the mere ability to have it brought the guy to the table for settlement. So,
is there anything then in this bill that you think should be and that isn't in?
Yes, that was funny. Segues nicely into the final point. So what I'll do is I'll read, because I agree, it's point 16, I think, or point 15 of the Bar Library submission, which I'll just read verbatim. The Assembly may wish to consider amending the provisions of the 1989 order defining who may petition for bankruptcy or winding up of a company to include a proviso that there is no need for the creditor to have first obtained a judgment. The legislation as it is doesn't say that the creditor needs a judgment. However, there is a practice guidance note from the bankruptcy master in Northern Ireland which says that she does want a creditor to get a judgment first.
Yes.
As we know, the road to getting a judgment is quite a long and expensive one, and a creditor who is already out of the money, I think we're typically seeing there's not a huge appetite to go down that road compared to just simply issuing a statutory demand and then 21 days later. And that's out of kilter with England and Wales, because that need to have a judgment was brought in as a COVID measure, which has stayed here, but in England and Wales it has been removed. And I'm certainly seeing a huge difference between England and Wales and here, because companies here in essence are allowed to continue with their head in the sand without pressure to pay certain debts as they fall due. So I think that would be a sensible suggestion, and how that interacts with the bankruptcy master's guidance is possibly above above me, but I think the principle is there and is welcomed. So my overall summary, guys, is these changes are positive. They've been in the pipeline for some time.
Of course.
However, whilst they're in the pipeline, the inefficiencies that exist in how we carry out our work continue. So again, while I'm speaking for myself, I think I speak on behalf of everyone where I say the sooner we can get these things through, the better.
That seems to chime with all the comments that we've received, so that's very useful for that. Thank you very much. Did anyone have any questions? No? Thank you very much for that then. Really, really appreciate your time.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
So colleagues, are we content then that, so obviously we'll go through a process with the department, but have we previously asked them in relation to the bar library submission, and now today, like, are they considering including that in the legislation?
They have actually responded to us on the bar library issue. And they have, hold on, I think it's actually in your packs. Let me just.
It's in correspondence somewhere.
Is it in correspondence for next week? Okay, sorry, I just wondered if we had it. No, here we are.
Oh, I think it's this week.
Sorry, it's this week. It's page 288. They've actually come back with commentary on that. I think they were suggesting, oh, for goodness sake, I think they were suggesting that they'd come up with reasons why not to. For goodness, sorry, members. Bear with me just 2 seconds while I find this. Page 288. There you will find the department's response. Yes, not that one. Assignment to the rights of the family of non-bankrupt spouse. Yeah. They say it would be constitutionally inappropriate to legislate in order to interfere with how the judiciary manages its casework and may violate the principles of judicial independence. It's there, they reckon that lies outside the scope of the bill, so that is their answer from the department. If members, I think the way we currently are is that we'd be due to be considering these issues informally next week. If you feel you need more briefing on that particular point, tell me.
I just think if the bar submission, I think they may have more legal expertise than the Department for the Economy. So if they're suggesting that that is the way to go, I would be minded to do that, but we can consider that when we're doing our informal consideration.
I also ask Chair that if the committee is content for me to formally share the response from the Department on the delegated powers.
Yep.
So if you remember, the ESR told us a bunch of things. The Department has we sent out the Department, well, didn't quite do that, but the Department has commented, and I'll just send it back to Angela and get her to come back with her counter.
Members content?
Yep.
Thank
okay.
you. Thanks,
Item 9 then, members, is at page 295. The Department has laid a statutory rule entitled the Insolvency Practitioners Recognised Professional Bodies Revocation of Recognition No. 2 Order Northern Ireland 2025. The rule is not subject to assembly procedure and will come into effect today. This rule will remove the Law Society of Northern Ireland from the list of recognised professional bodies. The committee considered the SL1 on the 22nd of October and had no concerns. Our members agreed to that the note of the rule is laid. Agreed,
yes.
Thank you. Okay, we then move to item 10, members, which is the RHI Winter Uplift Tariff SL1. And there's a cover note at page 300. The department intends to lay a statutory rule entitled Renewable Heat Incentive Scheme Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2025. The proposed rule is to come into effect in November 2025 and is subject to draft affirmative procedure and therefore will be debated in the Assembly. The proposed rule will amend the Renewable Heat Incentive Scheme Regulations Northern Ireland 2012 to increase the tariff for support payments made under the non-domestic RHI scheme to accredited small and medium biomass installations. The increases are for heat generated from November 2025 and are based on meter readings recorded by Ofgem. The proposed rule will fix the tariff for these installations for heat generated up to the end of March 2026. The winter uplift tariffs are the same as the closure payment tariffs that are currently out to consultation. The committee previously deferred consideration of this proposed rule, pending confirmation of executive approval and Treasury sign-off for the additional AMI cost of £10 million from November to the 31st of March 2026. The Department has subsequently advised that the Treasury approval is not required for this, and the Department has advised that the Executive approved these tariff uplifts at its meeting on the 18th of September 2025. The proposed tariffs appear to have been designed following engagement with the UFU, RHA, Northern Ireland and the FSB and aligned to the cost models devised by Professor David Rennie at the Queen's University Belfast. Details of the cost models have been attached. This appears to use CapEx information from the Grant Thornton model rather than the DFE estimates in order to estimate costs. The new tariffs are reported as generating an internal rate return of 12% over the 20-year scheme and are, the Department argues, compliant with state aid rules. Do many members have any questions at this stage? No. If not, are members content that the Department make the proposed rule? We agreed? Agreed. Okay. We then move to item 11, Energy Bill Relief and Bills Discount, SL1 at page 370. The Department intends to lay a statutory rule entitled the Energy Bill Relief Scheme and Energy Bills Discount Scheme Amendment Regulation Northern Ireland 2025. The proposed rule is to come into effect on the 1st of April 2026 and is subject to draft affirmative procedure. The proposed rule will close the Energy Bill Relief Scheme and the Energy Bill Discount Scheme. These schemes were brought forward across the whole of the United Kingdom after the pandemic. The Energy Bill Relief Scheme effectively closed on the 1st of April 2023 and provided for discounts on the whole-scale portion of energy bills for non-domestic users in the United Kingdom. The Energy Bill Discount Scheme replaced the Energy Bill Relief Scheme and offered similar benefits to businesses, and this was closed on the 31st of March 2024. If there are no questions, are members content for the Department to lay the proposed rule? Agreed. Thank you. Item 12 then, members, is at page 375 that the Department intends to lay a statutory rule to revise the accounting year end of the 6 further educational colleges. The financial year of the 6 Northern Ireland Further Educational College currently ends on the 31st of July. The proposed SR will change the financial year of the colleges that it will end on the 31st of March. The proposed rule will come into effect on the 30th of January 2026, but the financial year end will only materially change in March 2027. The proposed rule is subject to negative resolution procedures. Many members, any questions? Not, are members agreed for the Department to make the proposed rule?
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay, we then move to correspondence at item 13, members, the first of which is members are asked to note a departmental response providing a breakdown of spending review bid number 22, including support for tourism, but not providing information on aviation route development policy. Members content to note. Item 3 again is for noting as ministerial correspondence in respect of HSE Northern Ireland consultation on changes to gas safety. Members content to note.
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 4 is for noting as a ministerial correspondence advising on the launch and the consultation on the definition of a social enterprise. Members content to note.
Yeah.
Item 5 is a ministerial correspondence inviting the chair to a social enterprise event in April 2026. Are members content for me to attend, diary permitting?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. We then move to item 6, which is at page 555, is to note a ministerial response in respect of engagement with the Republic of Ireland Minister Lawless, who has given a commitment to engage on A-level recognition in the Republic of Ireland and in the respect of the CAO requirement for Northern Ireland applicants to have a second language. So this is good that they've given us an update on the engagement, but one of the issues that was raised was the discussions with the Irish government in relation to funding some of the places that were coming out of the Northern Ireland Mazencap from students studying from the Republic of Ireland in Northern Ireland, but to date there doesn't seem to be any update on that. Are members content that we ask for a further update on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Item 7, members are asked to consider a departmental response feedback on the consultation on low carbon heating in residential properties. Members content to schedule an oral briefing in January.
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 8, members are asked to note a departmental response in relation to the EECG scheme. The outcome of the review will be shared with us soon. Members content to note at this stage. Item 9 is to consider departmental response on how skill shortages vary by sub-region. Committee content to seek an oral and written briefing from the Ulster University on their skills barometer. Content. Item 10, members is for noting a response clarifying research into the impact of short-term lets was be led by DFC. Members content to note. Thank you. Item 11 is to note departmental correspondence on the GEM Northern Ireland 24-25 report. Members content to note. Thank you. Item 12, members, is to note a report from the Northern Ireland Audit Office into the Northern Ireland Energy Strategy. Is the committee content to note pending a reply from the department? Yeah. Okay. Item 13, members are asked to consider correspondence from the Committee for Communities seeking members' agreement on a joint letter from the Committee for Communities, Committee for Finance and the Committee for the Economy to the Department and to the UK Treasury expressing concern in respect of UK Shared Prosperity Fund replacement money and ask what work is going on to expedite replacement funds. Members content we sign? Yep. Item 14, members, is to consider correspondence in respect of the committee stage of the Water Sustainable Drainage and Flood Management Bill. The committee content to provide no response. It's not relevant to any of the work that we're doing. Members, Item 15, correspondence from the Committee for Justice. Members content to note. Item 16 is for noting this correspondence from the Committee for Finance in respect of the ESR. Members content to note. Item 17, members are asked to consider correspondence from the Committee for Finance advising that the Department of Finance has commissioned a December monitoring round. Is the committee content to write to the department seeking sight of their bids? Item 18, members are asked to note correspondence from the Committee for Finance in respect of the September public expenditure outturn and forecast outturn. Members content to note. Item 19, correspondence to the Minister for the Economy in respect of the banking inquiry. Members content to note. Item 20 is a note from Ulster University. Members content to note pending the HE Financial Needs Assessment Report. Thank you. Item 21 is to note the Ulster University response in respect of Consumer Council. Members content that we forward those to CCNI. Thank you. Item 22 is to note correspondence from UCAS. Members content to note. Item 23 is no correspondence from a copy of the Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels, providing a copy of the Brussels report July-September 25. Members content to note. Item 24 is for noting as correspondence from the House of Lords Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee. Members content to note. Item 25 again for noting correspondence from the House of Lords Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee. Members content to note. Item 26 is a request from the Chartered Accountants Ireland requesting to brief the committee on their new campaign to secure a reduction in corporation tax for Northern Ireland. I think they've written to the department or the Finance Committee too, so members content we do an informal session some afternoon that we can do a drop-in with them. Okay, great. Item 27 is correspondence from Advice Northern Ireland. Members content to respond on an individual basis to that invite. Item 28 is to note. Members content. And item 29 finally is for noting. Members content. Okay, forward work plan, Peter.
Thanks, members. I know you're tired. We're nearly there. I'll be quick. Just to remind you, so next week it's going to be the Insolvency Amendment Bill, and that's going to take us a while to go through all of that. But just if there are amendments formulating in your mind, that is the time to bring them forward and see if the committee wants to take them forward. And then we'll have to step through that. The 19th then we have Matrix AI talking about their AI research report, and the National Franchise Dealers Association talking about car registration issues. I'm also suggesting members see the committee visit to skills for life and work disability support service providers. Maybe we put that off to the new year. I'm just conscious that the forward work programme is getting a little bit, it's squeaking a bit. There's quite a lot on, so members are happy enough to do that. And then looking ahead, we've got bills coming out of our ears a bit. And the idea we would hear from the Minister, hopefully on the 7th of January, so we'll be coming back a bit early. The Skills Action Plan, and hopefully the Sectoral Action Plan on the 4th of February. And then Minister has indicated again that the employment bill is going to be introduced in January. She says it's going to be introduced in January. If it is, that's okay. We'll kick off the call for evidence. We'll finish the RHI bill, start the call for evidence, maybe actually start hearing the evidence after Easter. If it's not, there's other things to do, plenty to do. So are members content, therefore, with the forward work programme as indicated?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Fab. We'll have a think about that one.
Okay, very good.
Okay, any other business members? I just want to raise one. So it's my understanding that we're now fast approaching the run out of the additional 1,000 hours at Kilroot Power Station, and the other 2 power stations are still not back on. So this may become a issue that the Assembly and Executive may have to consider again, but I was just made aware of that yesterday, so I just want to flag it to the committee.
Okay.
Anybody, any other issues at this stage? No? Okay, with that then we will be back here next week, and thank you all very much for your attendance.
Okay, members, thanks for